What's your favorite game, baby? Let's play.
Good evening. I'd like to call this budget hearing to order. And tonight we will hopefully hear from the audit department first, to be followed by a presentation on our capital improvement plan, and to be followed by human resources. At this time, I'd like to recognize our acting chief operating officer. Oh, you actually want us to hear you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We're going to begin this evening with Patrick Campbell from Internal Audit to do his budget's presentation. And I have, once again, with me, besides Patrick Campbell, I have Jose Sanchez, who is the Director of Management and Budget at the table, and George, and I apologize, I don't remember your last name, Soltowski, who's working the projector over there for us. So with that in mind, Patrick.
Good evening, Council President Wooden, council members, colleagues, and others present. For those of you that do not know me, my name is Patrick Campbell. I am the Chief Auditor, and I am responsible for the Internal Audit Department. For the Internal Audit Department budget presentation, I would like to talk a little bit about the Internal Audit Department objectives, the audit selection and plan development process, our results in production, which would include audit reports issued, special projects and reviews, cost savings, and revenue enhancements. And then finally, wrap it up with our staffing and budget. The internal audit department output primarily is composed of audit reports and special project and review memorandums. Audits can be either planned by us or requested by various sources, including the City Council, the administration, or department management. For instance, we are currently performing a procurement card audit that was requested by council. And I'd like to let everybody know that we're in the final stages of putting the final touches on that report, reviewing the comments with management, and while we had hoped to issue that report tonight, it looks like we will be finalizing it and issuing it by the end of the day tomorrow. We also get another requested audit that we are working on right now is the city payroll operations audit, and that was requested by the administration. So again, we either include audits that we select ourselves in the plan, or we get requests for audits from various sources. Every year through our analysis of auditable areas process, we select about 20 audits to perform for our annual plan. These audits are selected from about 150 operations we have identified for audit from our areas of responsibility. These include the City of Hartford, the Hartford Public School System, the Hartford Parking Authority, the Hartford Public Library, the Municipal Employees Retirement Fund, grants, and other funded programs, agencies, and entities. So we have a pretty big area of responsibility. These 150 or so auditable areas are commonly referred to by us as our audit universe. As far as the audit selection process goes, we use a risk and exposure-based analysis model for identifying and ranking our 150 auditable areas. This model involves assigning numeric values to various audit-related factors for each auditable area, including but not limited to the size of the operation, the dollar value of the revenues involved, the dollar values of the dollar values and types of expenses, the complexity of the operation, changes in management processes and systems, the last time the operation was audited, the extent of the findings disclosed in prior audits, and the potential for fraud. So those are all the factors that go into us deciding how we're going to pick audits to do on an annual basis. The higher the risk, the higher the assigned number for each factor. The number assigned for each factor is then aggregated to determine the overall risk-based number for the operation. These numbers are then sorted from high to low to establish a relative risk and exposure ranking for each operation. So, for instance, some high risk and high ranking areas for the revenues, from a revenue standpoint, would include the tax collector's office, licenses and inspections, the town and city clerk's office, the treasurer's office, and the Hartford Parking Authority. So these are all areas where, revenues collected and accounted for. High-risk areas from an expense standpoint would include payroll operations, healthcare benefits, pension benefits, purchased goods and services, utilities. Those are some of the common high dollar expense line items that we would be spending a lot of time looking at. So through this annual evaluation process, areas for audit can be either removed, added, or the rankings can be changed on a year-to-year basis. So they fluctuate based upon our annual evaluation. So this is the risk. This risk-based analysis and evaluation is used as a source to develop our annual audit plan. We try to perform audits on a 1 to 4 year cycle, depending upon the ranking and the exposure. The higher the ranking, the more frequent the audits. For instance, we perform audits in the tax collector's office, treasurer's office, and finance department pretty much on an annual basis. Another big part of what we do would be special projects and reviews. In addition to our planned audits, we typically perform 20 to 30 special projects and reviews a year. These special projects and reviews are generally, again, requested by management, identified by internal audit, or identified and recommended or requested by some other source. Some of the more significant special projects and reviews performed to date this fiscal year include a special review of the Livable and Sustainable Neighborhoods Initiative operations, a special review of the procedures and controls relating to the Child Daycare Center program fees of the Department of Families, Children, Youth, and Recreation, a special review of the Learning Corridor accounts and operations relating to the Hartford Public School System, City of Hartford, and Capital Region Education Council. And then finally, a special review of Munis workflow and security and access issues. So that's the body of work, typical body of work that we would do on an annual basis. Now to talk a little bit about our results. You can move on to the first screen. You can see from this, you'll note that with the exception of fiscal year end 2010, our production of audit reports and special project and reviews has been on an upward trajectory, so we're increasing our production, and we are hoping to continue or at least maintain this trend by completing around 50 audits and special projects and reviews for this fiscal year. You will also note from the next slide that on an average we have identified around $2 million in cost savings and revenue enhancements per year over the last 5 years. This is considerably in excess of our budget on an annual basis. In addition to dollar cost savings and revenue enhancements, we also identify and recommend ways to improve policies, procedures, and controls that should help to prevent and or detect future risks and exposures. We also make improvements to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of operations. Getting on to the internal audit department staffing and budget. The internal audit department staff consists of 5 full-time professional employees, including myself, a deputy chief auditor, and 3 auditors. We all hold one or more of specific accounting and auditing certifications, including certified public accountant, certified internal auditor, and the certified fraud examiner. You will note that our recommended budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2014 totals about $480,000. This includes $476,000 and change, so to speak, or more than 99% for payroll, and only about $3,700 for non-payroll items. This $3,724 represents 8/10 of our budget. And I want you to remember that because I'm going to be talking a little bit about that in more detail later. Our year-over-year budget increase for this last fiscal year is $6,700, all attributed to HMEA contractual salary increases for our staff auditors. You will note, so our department, just to let you know, our department actually was one of the department's few, of course, that got a budget, theoretically got a budget increase for this last fiscal year. I think there were very few, obviously. But we did get an increase, but it was as a result of contractually mandated salary increases for employees. You will also note that over the last 4 years, our overall budget has increased by only $2,000, or by 0.4%. During this 4-year period, the salaries have increased by about $27,000, which equates to about 2.1% per year on average. Again, this increase is largely over that period is largely due to HMEA contractual salary increases for our staff auditors. Also of note and concern is that during this 4-year period, our budget for non-payroll items has been reduced by more than $25,000, or about 87%, from more than $29,000 to the aforementioned $3,700. Of this $3,700, available for non-payroll items, about $2,400 of that is committed to our annual license fee for our ACL audit software package. So basically, that's locked in, which essentially leaves us only with $1,300 for discretionary spending for our budget for a full year. And I want to say that although we submitted a request for an increase in our budget for non-payroll items, our request was not granted. It should also be noted that thousands of dollars of internal audit department expenses incurred during the current fiscal year for computer replacements, training costs were paid for with funds from other accounts. So we did have additional expenses that were incurred in this fiscal year, but they were paid, which we appreciate, of course, were paid out of other budget sources. But we feel that this is not the most appropriate or effective way to pay for our expenses. That being said, let's see. So we anticipate that this will actually also be the case for the current fiscal year, because we don't believe that we'll be able to manage our costs to less than $1,300 for the full fiscal year. So that being said, that is the internal audit budget presentation. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to share this with you, and would now like to solicit any feedback or questions you may have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, I'll start by asking you a question. With respect to your size, both FTE count as well as budget, how do you compare to other similarly situated municipalities?
I would say that we're probably on average. There is the Association of Local Government Auditors puts out a report on an annual basis that really spells out the audit function, both from a FTE basis and a budget basis for essentially every organization that is a member of that organization, and reports that data to the organization. So I would say that on average we're both from a FTE that we are on average about comparable to a lot of other municipalities our size, both from an FTE basis and a budget basis.
Questions? Councilman De Jesus.
Evening. Thank you for all your great work. I actually one of the guys that screened all your work, and I'm very impressed for everything that you guys do.
Thank you.
I think you just mentioned for the trainings and all, you said that the monies are not in the budget, but that they were paid from an account other than the one that is being listed here. Do you know what account that was?
I think actually perhaps Jose can speak to that, because we were working with Jose to get those expenses paid.
We have a good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
We have a centralized account called Employee Development Account that is used for all seminars and training events across all departments. This is the centralized account that you have to request funding for, that goes through the COO, gets approved, and it's from that account that we pay for, in this case, audit going for training or seminars. Likewise, we are working to centralize the purchases of computer equipment so that when Pat and his team need a new computer, rather than coming out of his budget, it comes from this centralized purchasing account, which will be managed by MHIS and approved by the COO.
Thank you. How are we funding this as a city, the centralized account, or today, and how do we plan on funding this going forward?
For this year, we on the capital side, in other words, computer purchase and things like that, We looked at every department that had their own computer equipment purchases budgeted in their own departments. We took it out of there and put it under the MHIS auspices. Likewise, wherever we found any travel-related items, we took it out of the departments and put it in the centralized account where we can manage it better and keep better control of it.
Right. Where do we fund it? How are we funding this currently, and how do we plan on continue to fund this
It's
going
being
forward?
funded in the budget. The employee development account is approximately about $139,000, and it's in the non-operating department. The computer equipment is a bigger number than that, because not only do we want to purchase computers for every individual that may need it, every employee that may need it, but we also have a plan on recycling old computers and things like that.
So, in the future, are we considering as a city? It seems that we've gone, and actually I was behind this item because I saw a lot of these items being zeroed out. So this kind of explains some of the situations that as to why they were zeroed out. My question is, understanding that sometimes when we're buying a computer, I think we've spoken about this. It's $1,000, for example, just a round number, and I guess we've been funding that with cash. Explain to me the system in which I figure is going to change into. Are we going to start borrowing? Are we going to start leasing? Are we going to start to do that, or are we just going to continue to fund these operations as we were doing today?
This is a valid question, and we're planning on giving you this answer as part of our capital budget presentation. But very briefly, what we're going to be looking at is to use the possibility of using what's called LoCIP money. That's for local capital improvement plan. This is an amount that's given to us by the state of Connecticut. Historically, it's been about $2 million. They're bumping it up to somewhere between $5 and $8 million with the new governor's budget. So we want to utilize that as much as we can. But we will get into more detail later on tonight when we present the capital plan.
Great. No further questions. I'll reframe. Next.
Councilman Deutsch.
Thank you. Through the President. I'm not sure if this is a mostly budget question or one of the function of the internal audit. Is one of the functions to audit the numbers and pay rates and times of consultants in any department, so that if there are, let's say, special consultants hired in a given department, is it part of the analysis to look at the documentation of their time and their rates of pay as a consultant, and whether in the same department at the same time there were layoffs in those departments of regular staff, city employees, and therefore to be able to balance any cost savings through assignment of work to a consultant and time and pay versus that work done by a regular member of that department. Is that part of the auditing function, so you can also show costs and benefits and so on?
Yeah, I mean that would be something we would do, and we might audit that in two different scenarios. We typically do purchasing audits where we'll go in and we'll do a comprehensive review of the purchasing operations, and in there we'll go in and we'll select specific expenses and costs, typically large dollar ones or anything, we will decide what we want to look at, and we'll select a number of things to look at. So we might look at that in that scenario. On the other hand, when we go in and we look at a specific department or operation, when we typically review the budget of that operation, and again look for large dollar costs. Again, typically consulting costs will rise to the top and they'll stand out as a line item, and we'll look at that. We'll look at those costs in that scenario. So we could look at it, those types of costs in typically two different ways. And so yeah, and we could also do it if there was a request or someone had a particular interest in a specific contract.
Okay, and so through you, then, at the same time as you do that analysis of consultant contracts for services, can there be weighed that against the costs that would be incurred as a doing the same function as a departmental employee with salary and benefits and so on, and if there are layoffs in order to shift from one to the other?
I mean, that's something we could certainly do, and it might rise. It might be something that would catch our eye if when we were reviewing the contract, especially if it was a high dollar cost, and we felt that those services could be provided more efficiently internally, as opposed to on a consulting basis. Yes, I mean that's something that would typically consider when we're doing a review of expenses along those lines.
Exactly. Thank you. May I ask one? All right. Well, two others, and again, if you want to defer it at the judgment of the council president. One of them is when we have contracts or work in the city through outside agencies, and I give two examples. Let's say MDC as one, or CLNP for power. Does the IAC also monitor for contract compliance, so that if, let's say, one of those MDC, CLNP has agreed to, as part of its contract, make certain repairs or restore certain conditions after their work, and they're obligated through contract to do so, is monitoring that compliance and responsibility for costs and timelines part of the function?
I would say that monitoring it, the answer to that question would be no. I think it's the responsibility of the operation that's responsible for that contract to monitor it. On the other hand, when we do go in and do an audit of the cost, and I'll give you a perfect example, we did an audit of the energy costs for the city, and we looked at some of the contracts related to that, and in particular as far as how some things along the lines is who was responsible for paying, or how we were paying for electricity for street lights, or how they were repaired, or different things along those lines. And we'll look at all the specifics as far as the contracts are concerned when we're doing that audit, and then we'll identify any things that we think are not proper, and then bring those to management's attention. So we would look at the contract and terms and conditions and see if we're in compliance with those at the time we do our audit. But it's management's responsibility to monitor those terms and conditions on an ongoing basis, on a year-to-year basis. I mean, we can only look at it, typically, like I said, in our 4-year cycle, we would look at it during that 4-year cycle and identify any areas of concern that we might have at that point in time.
Very good, thank you. I have one other. Maybe I should defer if others have questions and come back if there's time.
Councilwoman Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. One of the questions I had for you was, who do you report directly to?
It's a little bit a complicated question and answer, but I report to the Internal Audit Commission. And last year during my budget presentation, I gave a little bit talk as to the reporting relationship here. But essentially, we report to an Internal Audit Commission. It's composed of 3 individuals. One is appointed by the City Council, one is appointed by the City Treasurer, and one is appointed by the top 10 taxpayers of the City of Hartford, or essentially the taxpayers of the City of Hartford, and typically I think it's indicated that it is the top 10 taxpayers. And that's That's handled through the Metro Hartford Alliance. They, since they're a business entity, they coordinate. They coordinate with these the large taxpayers, and come up with some candidates, typically from one of their organizations, to come in and be an internal audit commission member. So there's 3 members, and we report to them, and they ultimately report to, again, the appointing agencies, which would be City Council, Treasurer, and taxpayers.
Thank you. And through you again, Mr. President, you talked about, on one of your charts, the cost savings to the budget comparison. Can you explain what that means?
There's 2 different lines there. One is our budget line, and you'll see that that's, for the most part, flat, because we've been, as I indicated earlier, over 4 years, our budget's increased by $2,000, so that's flat. And our objective for the audit department is to be, at a minimum, expense neutral to the city. So we hope, and our plan is, at a minimum, to identify cost savings that is going to offset the cost of the department. So the cost savings that you'll see on there are through our audits and special projects and reviews. We identify areas that where you could either reduce expenses or potentially increase revenue. And through our reports throughout the year, we accumulate those cost savings and revenue enhancements, and that's part of our our objective and what we report on an annual basis.
Through you, Mr. President. Now, who approves your budget and who cuts your budget?
Well, right now we are in the exact same process as far as our budget is concerned as everybody else. We submit a requested budget to the mayor's office. They decide what they want to do, just like they do with every other department, and notify us, and then we go from there. So it's essentially...
The answer is the city council through the budget process.
Yes,
So-
I mean, ultimately it goes through the council, but it's the initial process, like everybody else, is through the mayor's office, and then ultimately through the council here, for instance, here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to, I guess, follow up and stay on the, maybe it's your page 4, but this is the cost savings
Yes.
to the budget. And so the first thing I wanted to confirm on that the numbers reflected here are actual realized cost savings to the city in those fiscal years, or are they identified recommendations for cost savings through your audit?
They are. I report on an actual. There's a couple ways to look at that. Actual on a potential basis. For instance, some of those might be where we identify, like for instance, we looked at one report this year. There was a reimbursement from the state that we could have received, which it was not calculated properly. So essentially, they put in a request. They changed the request for the reimbursement, increased it based upon our recommendation, and we received the higher amount. So that was cash that came in to the city. There's other instances where, I'm just going to throw out this as an example, where we might find that there's a bank account or funds in an account where it's a non-interest bearing account. Well, we would recommend that they put that in a savings account or an investment account. Now, if it's whatever the dollar value is, we would say, okay, well, the current interest rate is 1%, so if you had $1 million at 1%, the potential investment income would be whatever the dollar value would be on that. Now, you can't go back and say, well, we should have had that in that account, so we can realize that currently, but that's something that we would project it, say, in the upcoming fiscal year. If you put it in that account, that would be additional revenue that you would earn.
All right, so in that example, would you, for these numbers that are presented, are you reflecting, say you discovered this account in June, it was non-interest bearing, and would you say actual cost savings based on the account moving to an interest bearing account in that additional revenue, or is it, so I'm trying to get a sense of,
Yeah,
is
I
this
mean, it's a
real
combination.
money
Yeah,
or just identified savings?
it's identified savings. I mean, it's not realized because, in the instance of the reimbursement, it is realized.
Right.
But, in lots of other instances, it's, a recommendation. For instance, we might see that they're not charging a particular fee. Again, well, you can't go back and recover those, but if you start billing those fees from that point forward, and typically what we would estimate would be, we generally estimate on an annual basis because that's what we're generally talking about. So we would say, okay, if you had 100 of these fees at whatever rate it was in the year, we would estimate that the additional revenue enhancements would be the total of that number.
Okay, I would
So
be.
it's sort of a combination of realized and potential.
So I would be very interested to see the breakdown, and I'm not sure, obviously you have the list that makes up these numbers.
Yes, I do, yeah.
And so if we could actually see what's been realized in
Sure.
actual cost savings
Right.
as compared to identified. And then,
Certainly.
I guess to the Chief Operating Officer, if you would share that list and understand to the extent we haven't realized on identified cost savings, perhaps we could discuss like why or what a basis would be.
Yeah, because I'm glad that you pointed out the distinction because, sometimes there are times when, for example, the auditors will identify that we could have done something differently or that if we negotiated something different in a contract that we could have had savings, which ultimately, when the contract is all said and done and it's been approved by council, that particular revenue item is not realized, but perhaps it was a good idea, but in the process of negotiation, it didn't become something that we felt that we wanted, or it was not in our best interest to go in that direction. So, so there are some things from time to time, and Patrick and I do have these conversations about things, even when it comes to certain fees and other things that they might suggest. We might review it, we might say yes, we might say no, we might bring them to you as proposed, and then you all might say yes, you might say no, and so once again, all of those kinds of things factor into when they come up with some of their projections.
Councilman Kennedy.
Through the chair, thank you. Looking at your budget, you've had 5 people now for several years. Could you give us in writing what it would take if we decided to give you a 6th person, given the increase it looks like in your special assignments that are unplanned? And if you could just let us know what that number is.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
In other words, you have 5 people in your department
Yes.
currently,
Mhm.
correct?
Yes.
If you had a 6th person, because it looks like you're having more unplanned audits at the request sometimes of this body,
Right.
in terms of what you would need to get that done to be a little faster and more productive.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm looking at your April 26, 2013 audit of the health department. Are you familiar with that?
Relatively, yes. Yeah.
Okay. A couple things struck me when reading it. Was the lack of segregation among the funds because munis apparently it can't handle that, and that seemed to concern me. It's in your.
Can you read the comment, please?
Okay. In addition, we noted that the duties related to the billing processes, handling of cash receipts, and recorded transactions in Munis financial system are not segregated, and various late fees totaling $57,600 were not assessed because of lack of procedural and clerical oversights. Also, accounts receivable balances need to be analyzed and adjusted for fines totaling about $288,000 that could have been assessed but were not in violation of Section 14.9 of the City Municipal Code.
Okay, so the question is then relating to segregation of duties, is that the question, or?
Yes.
Okay, well, the issue with the segregation of duties is primarily, in that case, it's a control issue. And that control issue is that you have one person that's really responsible for what I would call the whole revenue cycle. They bill, they collect, they handle the cash. When that happens, there's a significant potential exposure that individual can sort of run off and do whatever they want with those funds because there's no doer, checker controls in place, no one watching over their shoulder. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about segregation of duties. There should be people that are individuals that are responsible for the billing and accounting for the revenue, and other people that are processing it and depositing it. It's just so that that there's our checks and balances in place.
Have there been discussions on how to remedy that situation?
Pardon me?
Have there been discussions on how to remedy that situation?
Yeah, I mean, typically, again, you need to bring someone else into the process to do part of that so that, again, it's not all being done by one individual. And I think lots of times what we see, and is a common problem, especially in these days, is that some of these departments and operations are very lean, and you have they have a resource problem where they have a difficult time. They have only a certain amount of people in the department that are capable of doing some of this work, so that's the reason why they're assigning it all to one individual. So, that's just a...
Let me stop you there. Is that the reason we didn't collect $288,000 worth of assessed fines?
As far as the segregation of duties is concerned, no. I think that's more of not following up the and administering the legislation as it was.
I remember when we changed it and,
Okay.
and tried to give the folks some leeway with respect to that and
Right.
reduce those fees. 100 when you're late on your initial health care license,
Right.
100 later.
This is another typical problem that we run into where you see that you have the option of finding and presenting these fees to people, but essentially by doing so, you're potentially putting them out of business, and so sometimes management thinks that it's better to just sort of. I guess what I would say is that it might be more beneficial to reconsider the fee structure and the consequences of those fees rather than charging such a high rate.
Do all the vendors have licenses now?
Pardon me?
Do all the vendors have their licenses now?
I'm not sure about that.
Because I read the report, it didn't look like that was the case. I mean, I'm all for waiving of fines, but people need to get their licenses from Health and Human Services.
I think at the time we did our audit, they were still open. Some of those are still open. But I can't.
If we could have a report back on that, on where we stand with that, and why the $288,000 wasn't collected. I mean, that's a good sizable chunk of cash. I'll understand if it was done because of the hard financial climate that we may be in, and that was waived, but that should have been a conversation probably with the council, because I know when we changed that, we did that for flexibility to try to, because they had thousands and thousands of dollars worth of individual fines. I think Councilman Cotto was leading that several years ago. So just a general report on where that stands, because it looks to me like there's some good money there.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure it's in the report, but I think that those fines are related to a very few number of vendors. I think it's in there.
Okay.
It's less than 5 if I'm not mistaken.
Thought it was more, but I mean, I've got it
Okay,
highlighted and
I'll
glanced
double
through
check
it.
that, but we'll get you that information.
And Mr. President, if I can, if the Director of Health and Human Services, who I think is coming either today or tomorrow or the day after, he also can have an opportunity to respond to the questions regarding the audit and what was happening regarding that situation and what measures he's taken to address that situation.
Thank you.
I have
Counsel-
one just general, it's not a question, just a statement from Kit. If I can get every single contract vendor that we have, generally I make the same request every year so that we as a council can review the outside consultants that we're signing with the different departments. I don't want to take up question time with it, but if we could just be given a report on that so that we could all review that.
And this is generally with respect to city departments, not
This is
limited
generally
to.
with respect to city departments across board, management budgets here and internal audit, but that would be very helpful, I think, to council.
And if I may, Councilman Kennedy, are you looking for all time or just for this current fiscal year?
Just for this current fiscal year. We've got the information from the previous year.
Councilman McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you. First, I just want to congratulate you and your staff. You do a tremendous amount of work with only 5 staff people. That's very impressive, and it's very important work for our city. But I want to review some of the data on page 14-3. I mean, I know I'm glad to see that in this current year, you're able to complete all of the planned audits. But I'm concerned about the past years of when, I'm assuming that when there's a significant number of unplanned special projects and reviews that are requested, other audits are pushed aside as not being able to be completed.
And that's exactly typically what happens. It could be a number of things. We might plan more, and I'll tell you right now, we are very aggressive in our plan. Okay, we're not saying, okay, we'll do 10 or 15 or something like that. We'll put in a stretch plan, and fully anticipating that it's going to be difficult to make that target. But that being said, again, there could be any number of reasons. We could run into an audit that is much more complex than we anticipated and takes a lot more time to complete than we anticipated. So that will chew up some time and reduce the number of other audits that we can perform. We might get a lot of requests for special projects and reviews that will, again, take up time that we would normally have planned for our other audits. So it's typically a combination of those factors that, and I think for when I do my annual results report, which everybody gets, we issue it typically in July. I speak to what we did and why we might not have met that goal. So typically that's where we'll report on why we might not have met it.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I am glad to see that over the years, even though there were some years in the past that you weren't able to complete all the planned audits, you didn't reduce the number of planned audits going ahead. You just continued, because I would assume those are areas that you've identified as risks that need to be addressed.
That's exactly
and
correct.
audited. Yes,
right.
That's excellent.
And I think you'll see here in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, that was a year where we had only two. For the most part of that year, we only had 2 auditors. So that would be another factor where,
that year,
again, we don't have the resources to complete the plan.
Right, so I'm concurring with Councilman Kennedy about the concern to make sure that we have the right level of staffing in your department to handle all the demands that are put upon your department. That's very important to us. All right, thank you very much.
Councilman De Jesus.
Thank you, through the chair. I don't know if you recall, I think we had a very, I think you or your staff, we had a conversation about an audit report that was submitted by your body on January 31st, 2013. It was concerning the transactions that went through bidding process but did not get the proper PO systems.
Yes.
It's concerning to me because I am still trying, I guess I'm still waiting for the policy that change that, because in total, you guys found that there was $7.5 million that were done without POs. And I mean, I'm still gathering this information, and there was 2 transactions. The one transaction was $2.1 million. Second transaction was $1.3 million. And this is big money. I mean, what did you see when you went through this audit report, and why is the PO system so important, and what measures do you think were put into place to fix that? Because that's a significant amount of money being transferred without purchase orders.
Right. And typically what you're referring to is called an NPO, non-purchase order transaction. And a purchase order is put in place as a control to, you create the purchase order, and that's your planned or anticipated extent of spending. So by not creating a purchase order, you don't have control over the initial purchase, and then you don't have control over the costs associated with that purchase. So those are some of the issues. Now, my understanding is that they're going to be, looking at all these purchases and trying to identify ones that are not being processed through the standard purchase order process, and getting that to be the case. Now, I'm not sure what has actually happened since we issued that report. I think that you would probably have to ask the finance department, or actually it wouldn't be the finance department, it's, pardon me? Yeah, it's procurement, I guess it's under the chief.
All the deductions, yes, all the deductions for payroll, the payments to the IRS, the payments for FICA, and things like that are big numbers that are deducted from each payroll, and we need to do it. But we don't know the amount ahead of time of what amount is. Depends on each payroll. Those payments are made with non-payment vouchers. We don't create a purchase order for those payments.
But
Yeah, no, go ahead,
well,
respond.
I'm not sure that that $7 million, maybe it didn't include those, and I'm not sure. I didn't do that audit myself. My deputy was responsible for that. But typically what we would try to do, if that's the case, that where those particular expenses would not typically require a purchase order, we wouldn't include them as an exception. So I'm not sure if those were included in that $7 million or not.
Right, I think that the audit clearly states that in this situation, they did require PLs.
Right.
But they were not submitted. So now that I have financing, I guess, can you explain to me what measures were done moving forward, right? Because we're about to approve a new budget, and we want to make sure that we are by the book, especially when we're moving this amount of money. So tell me, like, what measures have been put into place?
If I may, what I can add to this is to say that that 2.3 million I think you're referring to probably is for the MDC, and the MDC requires payment on a certain date. If not, they get antsy and they charge us heavy-duty interest. And sometimes we have to make a payment before the budget is loaded into Munis, and you don't have the time to create purchase orders. Having said that, before coming here, I worked at the Board of Education, and one of my responsibility was purchasing, and I know what Pat is saying is accurate. Purchase orders do improve controls. Not only that, they encumber the funds to make sure that you don't overspend in that category. Currently, right now, for example, we cannot create purchase orders as of today. Because we're coming close to the end of the year, we will not be able to issue a purchase order in the month of May and June. So as a result, we have to pay those, make those payments without purchase order.
Yeah.
But having said all that, I know that procurement has made it a priority moving forward to make sure that any substantial size purchase be done through a purchase order. Smaller purchases, we don't want to necessarily use a purchase order. The average purchase order costs us approximately $250 to produce. If we're buying $50 worth of supplies at Office Depot, it might just make a lot more sense to pay for it out of a P card, for example. But nevertheless, the purchase order is something I know that procurement is pushing harder, is not approving any payments through accounts payable that requires a purchase order. I know I've heard cases in the last few weeks where these NPOs, non-purchase order payments, have been returned and would not be processed without a purchase order.
Right, you mentioned a entity who is not listed in this list that I have. It's not MDC that I have here. I have Capital Workforce, Ash Five. I have Knox Foundation, Oni Construction. I have Greater Hartford Arts Council. A bunch of agencies, and none of them include the MDC. And there's descriptions here of what it is. A lot of these things are consulting, travel expenses that are not being budgeted for. So I think I rather, instead of guessing what you have, I think I have the report in front of me, but I also have a chart which I think will be more appropriate to provide you in due time to respect that people want to go home. I think this is probably a conversation we should have as to the structure, but I will definitely like to see that, make sure that there is a system in place for these PLs, but I think we do have conflicting information, so I just rather have provide you this information, and so that we can speak on the same subject. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to wrap it up on this. comment?
Well, maybe I can ask two questions for the record, and we can have a reply. I think it's qualitative, just a reply. One has to do with whether there has been, or it's in the purview of the department to, since we audit the Board of Education expenses, the school building committee, let's say where there are large expenses, including a significant volume of change order requests, COR. And I guess the point has been made that some of these might have been avoided or could be avoided or might be denied. There may be a certain, let's say, non-necessity rate among the change order requests, and then, as a separate issue, a certain rate of denial because the reimbursing agency thinks that they were non-essential or not pre-authorized. So has there been or can there be a thorough audit, let's say through a certain period, let's say 2 years or so, of the change order requests that alter the initial anticipation of a city and the school building committee for these, even if it's included within the overall appropriation, the 10% allowance, whatever it's called. Is such an audit possible?
Certainly. We actually we've done audits in the past of the school construction projects. And actually we're in the process now currently of doing an audit of the capital improvement projects for the city. So, and we are actually looking at the change order process for those projects. But we could certainly, I think that might be coming up on our rotation, actually, as far as the school construction projects are concerned, and that's something we could certainly look at when we do that audit. If you want us to, and again, I'm not sure if it would normally be on our plan for next year or not, but if it's something, again, that you would like us to put on our plan and you have a concern about that, you could submit a request to us, because again, I'm in the process of developing my plan for next fiscal year. Submit a request for us and we'll put it in the mix and we can take a look at that.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good.
Wrap this up.
I had one more, but I can let it go or put it for the record. Okay.
I wanted to say that I think I didn't go over my departmental objectives, so they're in.
We can read it.
Pardon me?
We can read it.
Yeah,
Thank
they're
you.
all there for you. I'll save you the.
Okay. Thank you. We get it.
If you have any questions, you can let me know.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate everything.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Next, we will proceed with a discussion of the capital improvement plan.
Good evening.
Good evening.
For those who I didn't have a chance to introduce, I want to introduce Kyra Dodds, who is the director of the planning, new director of the planning division. I think I got. Say again. Oh, I should introduce myself. For the record, Thomas Deller, director of development services.
Although you need no introduction.
Well,
yeah.
particularly after I had those 2 cookies last night.
That's right. That's right.
So Kyra's been here 7 days, and she's getting quite an introduction. Good addition to our staff. The capital budget, as you know, is really a document that is designed to help us maintain our city properties, move forward with major projects we're trying to achieve, to maintain our public infrastructure and so on. What I'm going to do is give a quick overview of the highlights of what we're trying to achieve in this budget, and then I'll take questions from there. We have broken the capital budget into a series of categories.
Can I suggest that everybody turn to their budget books, section 34-11. That's where you will find the capital budget.
I have no presentation because I thought you'd have your budget book, so hopefully that's all right. So we'll start off with public safety. Many of these things are continuing items. One of the bigger items on in the capital budget this year is to address the parking shortage that was at the new public safety facility. The facility was unfortunately developed with not adequate parking to address the needs of the public and the employees, and we're trying to correct that issue over the next 2 years. Part of the initial study will be to, with this new capital budget, begin the analysis to figure out the least that we have to develop, and then to finish the construction over an 18-month period to address that problem. Under public facilities, we have a series of similar type issues. We have under municipal and facilities renovations, we've included some money to actually do a study of the various buildings that we have in the city and those that we're using and not using, and to look at a way to better meet the needs of the cities, space needs of the cities, and look at it a way in that we could save funds. Right now, we're paying over $2.5 million in rent, and if that rent were converted into the development of a building, that would result in a building of about $75 million that we could achieve with that rent payment. And if we were to do that, that would allow us to look at some of the other resources we have and say, do we really need this property? Can we sell this property? Can we turn that money back to the citizens of the city so we can achieve other things? So there are items in here that if we were through the study to make the decision to move ahead with some sort of different municipal facility that we may not do. For instance, the Bergdorf renovations, which are spread out in this budget for about $30 million over a number of years. That may be a facility that we look at and say, we can sell this, we can dispose of it and make some additional monies for the city. And we can also save the cost of those renovations and the environmental remediation and on and on. So we want to, in that municipal and facilities renovations, we really want to sit down and do a space analysis and figure out how we can best meet the needs of the space for the offices that we need, while best serving the public and doing it at the most affordable and reasonable cost. Another one I want to point out is electronic document preservation. In some ways, this name is not the correct name. We are using this account to take all of our paper documents and start digitizing so that they'll be available to people to look at, and we've already started with this year's capital budget. But this number has been raised up higher because we want to go to electronic permitting. We want people to be able to file their building permits or any permits at any time of the day from their house, from their architect's office, from their engineer's office, what have you. We have been analyzing software, and our goal at this point is to have software to go out to RFP. We have a sole source through Munis to actually, over the coming weeks, get a sole source contract negotiated with Munis to use EnerGov, which is the electronic document permitting process, to have them do a needs assessment of the best way to incorporate this into our system. Come July 1st with the new budget is to get the software permitted, bought, and modified for our needs, to get the hardware around November, December to work out the bugs, and to start rolling electronic permitting in January. I know that when I came on board, one of the big issues for the council was how fast we are acting on permits. As of today, the end of April, we are issuing 43% of all permits upon application. That's a rise from 4%. We still have a ways to go, but I think that we've gotten a lot better. I think the electronic permitting will help us to keep moving forward. The number is high because of the need for the different kinds of softwares and interconnections between the Fire Marshal's Office, licensing, inspection, Public Works, and others. But once we get that initial software up and running and have the hardware, we'll be able to move in a more timely fashion and get things done. But there's also money in here to continue the process of digitizing all of our old records so that people can find them. Quickly hopping down to parks improvements, what we've tried to do is lump together a variety of parks improvements and really have some flexibility to address a variety of issues. It is our intent at this year in this capital budget to do work at Elizabeth Park, Colt Park, Columbus Park, Batterson Park, Cronin Park, Keeney Park, and Pope Park. There's a variety of improvements that have happened that are out there. We are in the process of working on a maintenance plan for all the parks so that we have a comprehensive plan to guide our expenditures as we go forward in the coming years. But these are a variety of projects and needs that have been identified through the Parks Department that we're going to carry out and move forward. I'm going to jump over to infrastructure. One of the points I first want to make in infrastructure, we have a category called complete streets that says include street repaving and repair with a double asterisk. That number right now is a plug number. That number will be whatever number comes out of the state budget. So at this point, we have an expenditure number that was in the governor's budget, and at the very bottom, we have a revenue number that shows that coming in from the governor's budget. Until the final number is agreed, I don't know what that number is going to be. We're watching what the legislature is doing, but that was the number that was recommended by the governor. So that is a plug. So that number will change based on whatever happens through the state's budget process. What we have done this year with streets is instead of doing them individually, Weathersfield Avenue, Maple Street, New Britain Avenue, Farmington Avenue, we've decided that given flexibility, it's better for us to put them all under one category of complete streets. Because what happens is we have the ability to go after federal dollars or state dollars to supplement the dollars we already have and to be able to achieve more. Design also ebbs and flows at different speeds. We start a design process, we move forward with a particular design, and all of a sudden we get into a permitting process because of drainage, or something moves faster than we have anticipated. So we wanted to have flexibility to move the projects based on how they go through the permitting process at the state level. So the streets that we're looking at this year are Albany Avenues, Weathersfield Avenue, Maple Street, Farmington Avenue. I'm looking at Tony to see what I'm missing. Brookfield. I think those are the streets that are out there. We're trying to get them all designed and bid out and move them forward. So that number, those are the streets that are in there. We're really working with the neighborhoods. Just on Albany Avenue, for instance, originally went from Homestead to Bedford Street, I believe. And we have decided to extend it all the way to Main Street. So we've done the engineering so we can move ahead, so we can get that whole project. And we're working on the state dollars and federal dollars to make us be able to complete that. So we're looking at trying to approach that in a different way. The vehicles, computers, and other equipment, this is the line item in the capital budget that Jose had spoken about before. In this line item, we have approximately $1.8 million of what were items in the general fund that have been moved over to the capital budget. These, as I understand it, are for the most part expensive items that were used to repair vehicles and other things of that nature that are really capital in nature because of the cost of those items. Additionally, there's about $800,000, a little more than $800,000 in there for computer replacement as identified by the various departments, and $3.6 million for replacement of vehicles and other items that are out there on a rolling basis. I guess in some ways I have to talk about some of the bigger changes that is coming under the category called development. And I think that we have to think aggressively to think about how we set the city up for a way to make a change and to grow our economy, to grow jobs for the people of the city of Hartford, to make a difference. And I think that when I came here and started looking at some of our redevelopment plans and some of the things that we've done is we've had a tendency to be very spotty in our property acquisitions. So we might buy one lot in the middle of 4 or 5, and it doesn't give us the ability to do anything with that. Or we may buy a property like the environmentally contaminated properties on Homestead Avenue and let them sit there because we haven't figured out how to do the environmental remediation and to clean them up and move them forward. So what we've been trying to do is think more holistically about it, how we can be more effective and achieve more at what we're doing. So for instance, one of the things that we're doing this year with a grant that we've got, we're doing what I call a reverse retail analysis. We're basically saying, given the 25 acres of land that's the intersection of 84 and 91, where we know that over 300,000 vehicles a day pass that intersection, what kind of retail can we attract there? So what we're doing is we have a consultant who's looking at all the retail around the region and using their location models to identify the gap. What is the gap that we can attract into the city of Hartford to get people to come here and spend money, to also and to give our residents a place where they can shop and benefit, and how we can cause this land to be developed. So we're thinking of it in a reverse way. Instead of doing the analysis of this is what we want to build, we're saying what can we attract through the market? What are the things that we can attract here? And in doing that, we then can look at the property that we have, and instead of doing a traditional RFP approach, what we want to do is go out and do, just like the Yukon did for their site selection, we want to put out a request for ideas. We want people to come in and say, we're willing to do this or willing to do this, and consider different ways to actually grow and develop that piece of property. We've had some interest, but the interest has been somewhat marginal because I don't think we've done a good job of packaging and marketing the property, and we have gaps. We have pieces missing. So when we sat down and looked at how to try to put this together, we started thinking about what are the different types of dollars that we may need. So, project initiation, that's a small amount of money. This is a line item that's existed in the capital budget for a number of years. But this is to help us do those small things, get that consultant, do an environmental assessment, get an appraisal, hire a lawyer to write a document if we can't get it done through Corp Counsel's office. Redevelopment plan implementation is, we have all these redevelopment plans that we talk about doing things. We have downtown north, but yet we never funded other than a couple of property acquisitions. There are other properties that we probably should acquire. There are improvements that we should be making that we talk about in our redevelopment plan, but we didn't do them. And so this would be a way to create the whole parcel, to make the changes we said we're going to do, so that we actually have a marketable piece of land that we could actually do something with other than park. Moving down the list, the Economic Incentive Fund. When we look at some of the dollars that CRDA is investing in downtown, and we look at some of the properties, we felt it would make sense to make some dollars available that we might be able to match with the CRDA dollars to achieve more. So that's what that line item is. Economic development site acquisition is basically what it is. It's about acquisition. And I don't want to necessarily identify parcels, but there are places around the city where we have gaps. We own large pieces of land, but there's a piece in the middle that's missing, or a piece somewhere else. And we want to go out and try to complete those acquisitions so that we have a whole parcel. It's hard to sell a piece of property when someone owns 10,000 square feet in the middle of you. And so we need to think about how we package this totally and get the rest of those pieces. So that's what that is. NRZ improvements. Neighborhood revitalization zones put together their plans, and often there isn't money out there to do them, to carry them out. We've identified at least two major projects that have been talked about in the past that have had some funding that we want to work on. One is Homestead Avenue, the environmental remediation of the old mill buildings that are out there. We have gone out and we've gotten some federal dollars and state dollars, but we don't have enough to finish the cleanup. So we think between the capital budgets dollars we have from last year, the new dollars from this year, and about the $750,000 we got from the state and the feds, that we should be able to do the environmental remediation of those old mills and get that site ready for development. The other money that's been earmarked in there is for the Parkville Municipal Development Plan. The council funded part of that last year. We have sought $10 million from the Department of Economic and Community Development. This would be the construction of a road, Bartholomew Street, that would connect Hamilton to Flatbush, so that we have the potential to develop that 35 acres of land and bring some jobs and other things into the neighborhood. So the NRZ's been pushing that. We need some seed money to get some of that stuff going. So those are some of the types of things that we're talking about in that. State and federal matching is something we've had out there before. Small Business Loan Fund. One of the things that we've discovered over the past year is that the loan programs that are out there, because of where they get their dollars, have some very tough restrictions. And it makes it difficult for some of the businesses that we deal with. And so we're not proposing that we create our own loan program. We're proposing that we work with them, but it'll make available a small amount of money that doesn't have the kinds of strings that the federal dollars have attached to it. Yes, there would be underwriting and other criteria, and we'd have to make sure that we were properly protected with the proper mortgages or UCCs or anything else like that to protect our investment. But that's what we're thinking about.
Can I just ask you, so it's not a $500,000 loan fund, but it is $500,000 that you're seeking to make available for loans?
Yes. I don't necessarily want to get into the banking business. There are organizations out there that could do that. I think that have experience, but it gives us a little more flexibility to make some things happen. Some of the federal programs and some of the restrictions that have come with some of the loan funds out there are pretty tough. For instance, as an example, we put community development block grants into HEDCO to loan. To borrow money, if it's federal dollars, you have to be rejected by 2 different banks. If you've been rejected by 2 different banks, it's pretty tough. If you're not rejected, you can't get any money from the HEDCO. So it's a way to make some more money available to try to help some of the smaller businesses in the city. The facade program, we've been doing facade programs with federal dollars. Given the cuts in the federal dollars, we're down to 2 facades on a street. You really can't make a difference with small businesses. We'd like to be able to pick a couple of streets and concentrate on and try to make an improvement by putting some more dollars in. And the Bowles and Westbrook Village site preparation, we label it site preparation, but we've been working long and hard with the Housing Authority, and as you may know, they have issued the RFP for the redevelopment of those 2 sites. There's a pre-bid meeting for any developer who's interested on May 9th to get an understanding of what's proposed. But as we look at particularly the Westbrook site, we look at that as a gateway into the city. We look at that as a way to really help turn around the nature and character of Albany Avenue by trying to attract some businesses and retail to that end of the city. And we've talked with the Housing Authority that maybe if the council was willing, that we should make an investment into that to ensure that we really get a good gateway and a good commercial base that can support that end of Albany Avenue and help prosper on Albany Avenue. So those are the types of things. And then finally, we're at education. These are pretty much same things that we've seen year to year. The one new line item in here is, once again, we've called out vehicles, computer, and other equipment as a separate line item. So that's a quick overview of the budget, and I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you. Councilwoman Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Deller. I have a few questions. One of the questions that I have is, you've been here for a while now. How much money have you been able to spend with Hartford-based businesses, Hartford-based contractors, Hartford-based developers? I know that I was in meetings with some of them, and they haven't really had any success working with the city. So maybe you can tell us what the issues are and where the entry is for them.
Well, Councilwoman, I think it depends on the type of project and the type of contractor. For instance, in our housing program, whether it's lead or some of our housing rehab programs, we've been running about 85 to 90% of our work is with Hartford-based contractors. We've been working very hard. We have a pre-approved list of housing contractors from Hartford. In fact, one of the items we're talking about in the capital budget is creating additional monies into the Neighborhood Development Fund to do some more housing development. And what we want to do is make a requirement of that program that we're creating that you have to be a Hartford-based business to benefit, to be someone who works in this project. We're trying very hard to do that. Now, one of the problems we have is if our money goes into a project that's being also funded with federal dollars, because of the federal limitations, we cannot put in a requirement for a Hartford-based business. That's the trade-off that we have to get for getting those federal dollars. And so that's one of the things that we struggle with. We have gone out recently to hire architectural services to look at the John E. Rogers building on Main Street, the former school that's going to become the John E. Rogers Center, and to hire an architectural firm for the Lyric to get that designed and moving forward. We've hired Hartford firms to do that. We try very hard to hire them as much as we can when we can, but I think if there are particular firms that think that they're not getting enough attention, if you could get us that information so that we could figure out what they do and why they're not making it, then we can see if we can do something about it.
All right, thank you. Do you have a dollar figure for how much you spent with Hartford firms, Hartford-based companies, or firms?
Not off the top of my head. We could look at see if we can find you a number.
Is that one of the pieces of information we can get within 24 hours?
We will try to get it within 24 hours. I'll do our best. There's a lot of different programs we have to total, so we'll do our best.
Through you, Mr. President, is there a software system that can actually do reports and get the information that we need on how many Hartford-based businesses are being helped and, at what dollar amount? Or is this some software that's not available in your department?
Well, we use the Munis financial system, and it's not on Munis. We've been trying to tailor some tracking information for our own projects we're starting to produce reports like this that we have online, that we put online, that track all the different projects that we do, and we're trying to break this down by dollars and how we do things, so it might be something we can add to the software program that's being customized for us, but we don't have anything at the moment.
All right, thank you. I'll just reserve mine for later.
Councilman Deutsch.
Thank you. I wonder if I can follow up on the question just asked. You said that 85 to 95% of the work in Hartford is going to Hartford-based contractors.
In our housing programs.
Yes. Oh, okay. Is it possible to say from the figures that we have how that corresponds with Hartford residents? In other words, these contracts are with Hartford-based businesses. The first question is how do we verify that it is indeed a Hartford-based business or contractor rather than an office located in the city for that purpose, or a post office box? So that's the business organizational aspect, but then the actual workforce.
I will go back and ask staff if we can answer that question for you.
If I could address that, Councilman, on anything that we bid out, obviously, like a construction contract, procurement through contract compliance is in charge of doing that. So the first thing is when bids come in, they will verify if a contractor says that they're Hartford-based. They will verify, the address and the actual location of the company. So they do a process to verify that. And as far as Hartford residents, again, on construction contracts, we have that goal. And again, they're monitoring that throughout the contract, and at the end of the contract, they verify compliance with the goal, and they'll be able to verify and give the exact numbers at the end of the contract. They're doing it periodically during the contract, but the final amount is available at the end.
Thank you. I wonder, on that question of the Small Business Loan Fund, I was unclear about the dialogue in terms of Small Business Loan Fund, and does that constitute direct loans from the city to small entrepreneurs?
Councilman, we haven't worked out all the details, but it's our intent at this point that we would use an organization that already exists to make those loans. I don't really want to be in the loan business. I don't want to be in the loan business.
I understand. So I think I understand. So am I correct? We would have an intermediate, there is such a.
So there are a couple of intermediates, like Headco is one of them. Yes, we'd use an intermediate like that to make the loans.
And does that would we let's say specify the interest rates and so on, and any collateral that might be necessary even for a small business?
Yes, we would. We'd write up all the rules with them about what was necessary, the type of pro forma, the type of collateral, the backup information, interest rates, ranges, things of that nature.
All right. So could one reasonably say that for the sake of local employment and local businesses, that we should even make such a reserve or fund much larger to encourage a small business with local hiring throughout the city? I don't know if that's...
I'm a believer in walking before I run, so I'd like to try to see if we can make this work before I make it too big.
All right, and then maybe last question for now, just about a couple of specific projects. And either now or perhaps in writing you can inform us about that. Let's say that there is, you mentioned parking near the public safety complex. That was one of the first items you mentioned.
Under public safety, second item.
Okay, right. Oh, that's right, previous page. Would it be fair to ask if that parking I see, if that parking structure were not built, let's say in the coming fiscal year, 2.5 million, and those who would use it were just asked to walk to current vacant city-owned land a couple blocks away by 8491, all that acreage you mentioned?
Do you want to answer that?
Would that be unreasonable for the time being?
Well, I'll let Sandy answer the question, but I would say that our goal is to get that land developed because it generates more for the city in taxes if we can get it developed and to have it used as a parking. But I'll let Sandy answer that.
There are some restrictions in various collective bargaining agreements that deal with the distance that the employees can walk to their vehicles that we've had to contend with, which has made it very difficult for us to deal with the parking situation over in that vicinity. And our goal, as Tom mentioned, is to be able to develop those pieces of property that are immediately across the street from the public safety complex. Very valuable property, and we do not want to keep it as parking. So until we can identify some other parking arrangement, i.e. a parking structure on the site or someplace a little bit closer than where you're suggesting, they're going to have to stay there.
Well, the counter to that is, well, how about providing a little van, a little shuttle van or something?
We've suggested all the things that you're suggesting, and we have not been successful.
Oh, okay. And then just one other line item here, which we've asked about before. There's $5 million set aside for Public Safety Academy, which, as I understand in the past, was site prep. That's on the top line of education, page 3412, Public Safety Academy.
I can address that. That's, if you'll recall, there's actually, there was $5 million in the current year. We took $2 million and provided that to the Milner School so that they could do some work in connection with the Jamoki Academy, which leaves a balance of $3 million in the current year and $5 million for next year. And it is still our expectation that we will be able to develop a public safety academy. The chief is working currently with some other partners in the community to see if we can't still put together a public safety academy. And so that money's there to be able to do whatever we need to do once we locate a site and decide what the program's going to look like to be able to make improvements to that particular facility.
Well, through you, finally, I understand that. I think that's been explained to us before. And yet, when we've asked to see plans for building on that site and some evidence that there is funding coming for a public safety academy right here in Hartford, and we're asked about site preparation, but unless I missed it, we haven't seen specific plans for a specific site to prepare for specifically. And I know we've gone around, and that's in the ordinance that we passed for a couple of years now. First $5 million and now down to $3 million, of course, because of Milner. But I still fail to understand why we should appropriate money for site preparation when we don't have a plan to use that site, funding for building, an actual building and designs and so on, such that we should prepare the site for it, rather than defer it until we have all of those plans in hand.
Initially, when the money was first put in the capital improvement plan for the current year, the $5 million and $5 million for next year, we actually had identified a few locations that we were working with CREC to locate a public safety academy. Since that time, those plans did not go forward. So at this point, we're revisiting what the public safety academy would look like, where we would locate it once we decide what it should look like, and then we'll move from there. So we're not spending any of those dollars at this point because we're really still in the discussion phase, trying to decide what the plan's going, what the public academy would look like. We've actually had some meetings and some discussions with the Board of Ed. We've had a meeting with the Law and Government Academy. They were interested in having a public safety academy there. So there's some conversations going on about where the Public Safety Academy should be located, whether we need to build something new, whether we have an existing structure that just might need some renovations, and what the program actually would work like.
So finally, couldn't we save $5 million by...
Okay, we're going to make it the final question.
Fine, that is. Couldn't we save $5 million from this CIP just by not including it and doing so when we're ready for it?
We could do that. A question with respect to public facilities, Quirk West. I just want to confirm, it's under public facilities, but is this the portion of Quirk that is under the current control of the police department?
Yes.
So is there a reason why it's not under public safety?
Tony, why'd we do that? Tony? I guess the easy answer is no, right? We just ended up there instead of public safety.
Okay.
Right, we just considered it with all the other public buildings, but it certainly could have been under the public safety category as well. But that is, in fact, the same facility and the same program.
Okay, and are you in discussions, as I recall this generally, at one point the Wilson Gray Y was in discussions, or the Y was in discussions with the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education, with respect to utilizing that space. And then the police department, with the support of the Board of Education, transferred, or the Board of Education transferred control to the police department with the understanding that they would be partnering with community-based organizations, including the Y, and that this has been an ongoing discussion, and that the Y has offered to put in, for a community-based organization, I think at least $100,000 towards redevelopment, but that has not gone anywhere. And so if this is the same building in the same space, I guess I'd like to know what's happening and why don't we see that partnership that was expected when it was transferred to the police department, and now we're asking for money and not taking external resources to help make this happen.
In fact, we are still working with the Y. There was a meeting this week to talk about how quickly we could get the pool ready, because they want to start running programs. So one of the things that, as we get further along in the budget process, that we're going to be looking to do is, we had initially projected that Quirk was going to be a 3-year program. We're going to be proposing to the council that we move we get rid of the third year and move the $4 million in the third year into the first year, so that we can do the ground floor, which is where the swimming pool is, do the first floor and the second floor, half of the building, so that we can do the PAL program on the second floor, which is actually where the PAL offices and all the facilities would be, and then on the third floor for half of the floor, which is where the gymnasium would be, and that's where we'll be running the programs with the Y and with the PAL program. So that's what the proposal is. But we need to do, we're trying to figure out a way that we can speed up getting the pool done using some monies that we have available right now for Quirk until July 1st comes, when we can access the rest of the funds that are projected in the capital improvement program for next year.
Okay, so the plan is to go forward with partnering to utilize
Yes.
the pool, the gym, and other areas of that
Absolutely.
space?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Kennedy.
Thank you, through the Council President. I'd like to start off with pages 3415. W1304, North End Senior Center. What I'm always amazed at is how we put money in the capital improvement budget, and then I'm looking at $1,337,097 appropriated, and the balance is still $1,337,095. And I got a whole list of these, this package. What someone needs to explain to me, how you can put money in this to be spent during the appropriate budget year. That is obviously council's will. Council has approved it, your recommendations, we add some, and then we come back to the year and nothing has occurred. That's what I find difficult.
If I could address this specifically, the North End Senior Center went through a redesign process, and we actually expanded the program at the request. That's why we did come back to council for some reallocations in the past. However, the project has in fact been bid out, and we are actually in the final stages of the award process. So we will have a fully executed contract, hopefully within a month or so, and construction will be beginning this summer. So we really are moving finally on that project.
If you,
If I could just add to that also,
Okay.
part of what delayed it a bit also is just trying to figure out where to relocate the senior center while the construction is going on. So we had some suggestions. They had some other suggestions. So we're still trying to work that out. But also before the council, I think it's still in committee, is a request to add some additional funding. The project wound up being quite a bit more expensive than we had initially anticipated. So that's part of the reason. So it's moving along. It's just you're not seeing the construction, but believe me, there are things that are happening.
this is not my book.
No.
This is the administration's book. You'll also see North Indian Senior Renovation approved, and then this was last year's approval. That was approved 5/29/2008. Looks like of that $300,000 expenditure, only $118 was spent. We still have a balance in that account of $152,000 plus. And I'm assuming maybe that's some of the money that you spent and used.
Right. That was for the design.
Okay. I mean, I'm saying looks like that may have been the design money, and now we're looking at what hasn't been spent. Blue Hills Recreation Center. Council approved that in May of 2011. We set aside $200,000, and I think that was only supposed to be the beginning part of that. We have spent a total of $4,000, it looks like. Well, maybe 50, but we have 150 to go. Is there where is that, and where are we in that stage?
I'm sorry, what was the number again, Council?
19, Tony. 26 down.
W2619, Blue Hills Recreation Center. Council approved, CIP budget 5/23/2011.
Jose, could you verify this? I believe this is the center that was mislabeled and has never been corrected. I believe this is North End Senior Center money, not Blue Hills Rec.
With all due respect, I don't believe that's correct. There have been promises made to the Blue Hills Recreation Center in terms of, for some time. Now, whether those were meant to be followed through on, I don't know. But I'm just looking at what looks like beginning appropriations funds to a total renovation of the Blue Hills Recreation Center, and I don't think that project ever happened.
There was discussion of the Blue Hills Recreation Center. There was a design study done, and the reality was that the building was found to have significant structural problems, asbestos and so on. So the current view is to relocate that program perhaps, or to build a brand new building. So the $200,000, while it looks significant, assuming it is for the Blue Hills, will not accommodate either a new building or relocating the program.
I understand that it's still there, but I don't think that's ever been discussed with the community, that the building was not sufficient, that you wanted to move and locate the program elsewhere. I mean, and that's, take that under advisement, if you will. Let's go to Keeney Park Pond Pavilion. I was there the night the presentations were made with respect to the Park Pond Pavilion, and asked that we actually consider an additional, Tony, I think you were there that night, that we make an additional expenditure on that as well. I have a 50,000, excuse me.
Which item is it?
Project number?
Item number W0595, it's on page 3417.
The study has been completed. As you were present, we came up with those two recommendations. Next year's CIP, part of that $3 million plus that you see, allocates design money to design that portion of it, so that we will be proceeding with next fiscal year's money to be addressing a design for the pavilion area.
Okay, been here long enough. I have everyone's word that that pavilion plan will be done by next spring.
The allocation for next year is for design. It is not necessarily fully funding the pavilion. The pavilion, rough order of magnitude, depending on where it goes, if it goes into the area where the, I'm trying to remember, there were two, there was the area near the pond house and the other area, of course, but the rough order of magnitude was like $750 to $1 million. So we will be able to accelerate the design, but not necessarily.
I understand what you're saying. I just remember being there with the folks that were there and their expectations. And I don't think their expectations, the folks we serve, have been met with respect to that project with the Friends of Keeney Park. Keeney Waverly Expansion Athletic Fields. Appropriated by Council 6/2/2009, $500,000. Where do we stand with that project? It looks like a good portion of that money has been spent. I haven't been to I haven't been to Simpson Waverly to see if it's been finished or not, but that became a big issue for us to make sure that project got done.
That project is actually in construction. It's ahead of schedule. We projected to renovate 4 existing fields at Keeney Waverly in 2 years. We projected to do two fields first, and then the next 2 fields, actually in this summer, we actually completed 3 fields. So the other part of the project was the cricket fields. 1 field has been completed, and the other cricket field goes into construction this summer.
Discussing the cricket fields, and I'm going to let other people chime in because I know they have passionate feelings about this as well. I know the cricketers are not a happy group of folks with respect to how that was done. Has anyone had a conversation with them in terms of how that drainage and how that project has moved forward?
We actually met several times with the cricket folks concerning the drainage, and we actually did a change order to improve the drainage. The drainage that was there was deemed to be not adequate, so we increased the drainage capacity of the field and the drainage into the nearby brook or culvert. So we did actual improvements during construction to get the field to dry up or to improve the drainage.
I mean, has there been a conversation with them in terms of the cricketers and where they stand? Are they happy with the outcome and the results at this point?
I will verify with them, but again, through our project managers, I believe they are satisfied with the field that's done, and then we will obviously go into construction for the next field. But our most recent meetings out there, we meet approximately every 2-3 weeks with the cricket fields and with the Keeney Waverly folks, has been good.
I've got 2 more projects to discuss, and then I'll give up the mic, and I apologize for my time. I'm now looking at Cronin Park, 34C17. 3417 is W2638, W1332. It looks like some money has been spent with respect to those projects, but I drive by there frequently. And where do we stand with respect to that project? We were supposed to resod the field, irrigated water system underneath the field. I see some of the park has been done, but it looks like it's in maybe 50% done. And when do we plan to get that done?
The field work will be proceeding this summer. Some of the early work was done last fall. However, most of the progress has been with a playground and a spray pool, which is well underway. And the playground and the spray pool actually will be able to be opening this season as projected. So we are focusing first on the playground and the spray pool, and then the second effort will be on the field. And the field will be completed in time so that we can let it be ready for this fall.
Lastly, project I put in was Dillon Stadium. That was part of last year's budget negotiations. We put $1 million in to design it, had several conversations with respect to how it was to proceed forward. I've read the emails regarding the Ripken fields, no objection with those, and see where it goes, but it looks like somewhere Dillon got lost in the process. Dillon's already designed for, in terms of the rock base, for drainage. We had discussed turf field, potentially renovating that entire stadium, and $1 million looks like was the first thing we were supposed to do. And other council people were in on those discussions. To date, and $75,000.
We actually did put out an RFP for Dillon Stadium for somebody to give us some ideas on what they would do with the stadium, and so Jared is a lot more familiar with what actually came back as a result. I don't know if you've been involved with discussions with him as a result of the results of the RFP, but I know that it was not something that we were totally satisfied.
I understand the chief of staff has some involvement with it, but obviously that's necessarily a little bit outside the scope of his design job duties.
Understood. And the only reason I brought that up is that, I think eventually we're going to have to decide what we want to do with Dillon Stadium, because $1 million is not enough to do much with Dillon Stadium. I mean, it needs a whole new redesign and rethinking about what we're going to do with that facility, because that's just $1 million is a Band-Aid. We need to do, and I know I'm preaching to the choir that, we need to do the lockers and really do.
I'll say something. I can say something
Okay,
about it.
Tom can comment on this
I didn't
as
mean
well.
to interrupt Sandy, but we did get a proposal back that was looking to expend a lot of dollars on Dillon Stadium. And we have been sitting down with that developer trying to analyze and understand the wherewithal. Does he really have what he says he has, and can he bring to us what he says he's going to bring to us? We are expecting that we have a meeting set up next week for him to bring back some additional information based on what we requested. And if he gives us the information that we have asked, and if it's verifiable, then I think that we'll be before you shortly saying this is a deal that we would recommend that would have private investment instead of city investment to make these changes and to do the following things.
Yep. I know about that, and I've heard about some of those doubts. Have we developed a plan B? Because either we have to do something with Dillon in terms of bringing it up to speed, or we have to just knock it down. I mean, it's going to be one of the two at some point. And whether anybody wants to hear that, I don't want to hear it because I think it's a wonderful space. But the $1 million was basically designed so we could get some things moving and to have a plan B from terms of city investment as to what we're going to do. I've looked at the future investments in your budget, and you have $500,000 for each successive year. So if $1 million's a Band-Aid and not spent, $500,000 is not even a Band-Aid for the next couple of years. So which basically tells me, from the administration's point of view, that it's not a priority, it's a non-starter.
I would say, Councilman, that we are hopeful that this will go forward and that the dollars that we have in the capital and budget would be our investment, the city's minor investment for the larger investment. Probably within a week to 2 weeks, we'll have a sense whether this is real. And if it's not, we're going to have to step back and very quickly put together an action plan, and we will do that because I think this is an important asset that we got to maintain and figure out how we build on that to help bring excitement and vitality back to the city. So we have $1 million from before. We have $1 million for this year, 500. That may not be enough, but it can get us started as we try to formulate the plan and come back with a more detailed next year.
I'm very interested in the plan makeup, assuming it's a plan B scenario.
I understand.
Okay. No further questions.
And can I just add, one of the other things that's coming down the horizon that we just found out about recently is we're going to have the same discussion about our golf courses. So I just put that out there that, as we talk about finally what to do about the capital improvement plan, what we're ultimately going to do with Dillon, how much more money we need to spend on Dillon if things don't happen with Tom's discussions, is that, We had an RFP for a management company to manage our golf courses, and we got no responses. No one's interested in coming in and managing our golf courses in the condition they're in right now. So we really need to put our heads together and try to figure out what do we want to do.
On that note, have we begun to put together the plans? I mean, Keeney's one of the, let's be
This
honest. I mean,
just
Keeney's got some of the best holes, best golf holes in the state, and has long been recognized for that. It's a really mature, beautiful golf course. Good one is great for guys like me who need more open space to enjoy the game.
This just happened a couple of days ago, so the answer is no, but we've been turning to some other golf pros around the area to try to figure out exactly what we need to do and to try to come up with what a number is that we might need to invest. So I just throw that out there just because we're having the conversation about Dillon and the need possibly to come up with some more monies to do something with that field.
I would be interested in any information you can provide with that as well. Thank you.
Councilman Anderson.
Mr. President, thank you. But I'm going to be very short because all my questions were answered. I can't get any TV time. I just try hard. Hi, Mom. I can't get any TV time. Thank you, Councilman Kennedy, for answering all my questions. And Madam COO, thank you for addressing my last concern, was the golf courses. I haven't seen anything in here for that, but you're already addressing it. So let me come up with another idea, another question, so I can get some more TV time. Mr. Deller, going to you, because they've covered. Oh, also, I have to publicly say, Mr. Mata has done a phenomenal job at Waverly Field. So I take my hat off to you. He's been there working with the community, working with the stakeholders at Waverly, and moving the project ahead of schedule. So that, I just want to say publicly, that's great. But we still need 2 dugouts for the Pony League. Give me some good news.
I have found the money for that. I'm going to ask for a change order.
I like Mr. Mata. Also, too, I think that'll help, too, just to let you know, help with the discussions with the Board of Ed and the field unavailability or their lack of. So we'll work that out. Mr. Deller, it just had to pop in my mind. Looking at the possibility of Dillon trying to raise more funds coming into the city with revenue and so forth, what is your projections as far as return on these outside investments? Do you have anything on the top of your head where we can start seeing some more revenues coming into the city, since that's been a major issue that we don't have enough revenues being generated?
I think the struggle is how do we market the city? What are the things that we're trying to achieve? And if you look around the country at cities our size, there's been 2 ways that they've drawn development in. One is through what we'll call the entertainment package, sports, things of that nature. So I look at Dillon and I see some of the discussions that we've had, and if we can be successful in those discussions, that's another venue in which we can start bringing in some more people into the city to enjoy that facility, while we also offer a great facility for our local teams. So we really need to think about it. The other is really trying to position ourselves to attract development. I have to say that because we have partial pieces of land, and because we haven't really put out the image of what we want to achieve or what we want to be, it's hard to attract people. So when you have 300,000 vehicles a day driving by 84 and 91, I don't understand why that property hasn't sold or been developed, and obviously we haven't done something. So I think that the issue, and that's why I said earlier, the issue for us is really to position ourselves to get everything under control that we need to get under control, and actually tell people why they should be here, and that's what we're trying to do. So to me, it's entertainment, whether it's the Bushnell, the XL Center, the Dillon Stadium, it's that aspect, and then trying to grow by identifying the things that we should be able to get here and trying to woo them in.
Councilman De Jesus.
Back just in time.
Excuse me, Councilman, this is probably a good time. Unfortunately, I have scheduled a call for my other job at 9 o'clock tonight. Shame on me for thinking. And so I'm going to have to excuse myself, and the majority leader will take over from here.
So as the transition happened, I'll ask, I guess, the first request. My first request is to, I see that you alluded to some of these funds being potentially funded by state or federal monies. If you can provide me a list of those projects in the CIP who have that potential or may have that potential.
Sure.
And how much is the match and all that good stuff. So that'll be great. Going into the to the budget, I think is a question that I've asked previously, but I think we finally got to a point where I can ask for it. Page 3412, infrastructure, and where you see vehicles, computers, and other equipments. There is $6 million that I was trying to locate from last year's budget. I think I finally located it. It's exciting just to find stuff. So can you just go down the list of things that are now in that category, and understanding that the tagline has also changed?
I'll answer that, Councilman De Jesus. This is a line item that we've included in here to react to the governor's proposed budget. The governor's proposed budget takes away some cash contributions and replaces them with capital contributions. That capital contribution is referred to as LOCIP money, L-O-C-I-P, which stands for Local Capital Improvement Plan. We have gone through and trying to squeeze as much as we can out of the budget, have found that in the past we have paid cash for a variety of goods that could be paid for using capital funding. These are items that are fixed asset in nature, tend to be over $1,000, and have a useful life of over a year. Our efforts are to, instead of paying for them in cash, to pay for them out of capital. In that $6 million, we have $1.8 million of that $6 million is money that we have found in the general fund that we can move over to capital, including things like transmissions for garbage trucks, computer purchases like the one that you have in front of you. We also include here $800,000 for purchases of new computers. Between the board and the city, we must have close to 6,000 computers. While I was at the board, I did an audit of computers, and so we have a plan that once the computer has reached its useful life and has become unproductive, to replace it. In addition to that, we have $3.6 million in that line item associated with vehicle purchases, purchases that we could have paid cash for, we could have leased for, we could have bonded for, or we can use LOCIP money for. But these are purchases of vehicles like fire trucks, police cruisers, things like that, that make more sense to put in this line item.
Same thing for the educational budget. The $1 million there is pretty much going to be the same.
Yes, the education is exactly the same thing, but rather than being city expenditures, it's education expenditures. Now, this line item is unique in another way. This $1 million is used as part of the MBR contribution, the minimum budget requirement. We are obligated, based on minimum budget requirements, to give the Board of Education $284,008,197 next fiscal year in keeping with the MBR. We have determined that the amount we can contribute can be in the form of cash or in the form of capital. We've worked with the Board of Education. They've identified about $900,000 in their 13-14 budget that they have in the general fund that can be associated with capital expenditures, and we will be starting the project this Friday to expense those items in capital instead of in the general fund.
A quick question on the development of, when it comes to public facilities. The DOJ ADA improvements in combination with the municipal and facility renovations, it's about 3.7 million combined. Are these two things two of the same? And if so, where are we making these renovations? This is 3411.
I'll let Tony describe the DOJ improvements, but they are different. The municipal facilities improvements, let me get my notes here. It's a series of energy improvements and things of that nature. Let me get the exact list. Shell improvements, energy improvements. The part includes making comprehensive plans for 40 and 50 Jennings Road, doing the analysis of space needs, 275 Pearl Street.
Just before the actual budget, all the items, there's actually narrative for each of the projects that's in here that kind of puts forth all the projects. Sort of gives you a summary of all the municipal.
Right, but my question was, or they're two of the same?
They're different.
They're going to be two
They're
different.
One is relative to building space needs, fixing up buildings. The other is relative to handicap accessibility.
Right. So the handicap accessibility, what structures are we going to do these for?
The handicapped accessibility, we have been cited by the federal government, and we have a 10-year span. We're about halfway through it. Specifically, we're going to start to address handicapped accessibility issues here in City Hall. We had set aside money for 525, which is still set aside depending on the determination of that. We also are going to be going down the list. So,
Yeah. In this budget, I think we discussed it yesterday for 525. The money that is set aside for that is also set aside under that same description, DOJ, ADA. I think that was predominantly what the money was set aside for, right?
the money for the Department of Justice was set aside for all city buildings.
But for 525 specifically?
525, well, again, it was set aside for all city buildings. We have gone through the list, and we have accomplished handicapped accessibility improvements on a lot of the buildings. What we are now addressing are some of the more difficult buildings like City Hall, which is just because of its historic nature, is more sensitive and more difficult to do. The 525 handicapped accessibility changes are on hold pending the decision of the 525 building.
And that's important to hear because we did budget in this budget the sale of the property. So there is some revenues coming from that. So I would definitely like to hear that money has been stopped so that we can really understand where we're coming from. The monument study always seems great. I don't know who's going to get the monument, but tell me more about that information, Parks and Recreation. Or is this a restoration process, or what is this entitles?
We have done a monument study. I think the last time was about, I would say maybe 8 years ago, somewhere in that range. And what it does is it just goes through and assesses the condition and necessary repairs. Some of these are just little faceplates on buildings. Some of the major monuments are, of course, the Colt Monument and so on. So the monument study will do a simple schematic assessment of all the city-owned monuments and will determine a rough scope of work and a rough budget, as well as a condition assessment, which determines the budget. So then we can see what we recommend that we do afterwards. It's something we've done in the past. We've done some improvements to the Bushnell Park Monument as a result of this former study. So we expect that this will lead us to guide us on what monuments are in the worst conditions and what monuments need maintenance and repairs.
Okay. And another concern in this, I'm going to wrap it up, because the other information I guess I can also ask off through the email system. Been brought to my concern, and it's something that's concerning, and the reason why I know that is because I usually abstain when it comes to alcohol being served in our facilities or any city facility. I just don't like the fact someone drinking. People when they're drinking, they're not the most careful with things around them. But there's a city ordinance that has been in place since 1977, and it has been altered 1991, 94, the latest was '04, section 26-6. And I don't see much revenue coming from this. Yet I do see a lot of revenue. I do see a lot of these requests for these facilities for use. Are we following up on this? Are we enforcing these ordinances? Are we trying to?
What is 26-6?
This is. I'll give you the chapter is in our municipal code. It's chapter 26, Parks and Recreation, and is section 26-6. It includes Elizabeth Pond Memorial House, Goodwin Park House, Keeney Pond House, Elsner Center, William Ware Center, Highland Center, Blue Hills Community Center, Poe Park Recreation Center, so on and so far. And it says that, for different functions, there is a fee that is attributed to it. Are we collecting that fee? And if so, where in the budget is it? Because I know that, I think just recently we just approved on our special meeting a event there to serve alcohol in one of these, I think, events. But are we collecting a fee for this usage? Because the ordinance does require that we should be collecting these. And my concern is we're investing more money into these facilities, and this should be kind of a way to offset some of the costs.
We can give you the answer in writing if you like, but Kevin Burnham, who will be here in another day or so, will be in a better position to tell you which fees we're actually collecting, what our relationships are with the various friend groups in the parks in terms of some of the fees that they get to share with the city. So I would really defer to him unless you would prefer to have that answered in writing first and then also follow up with him when he comes.
Yeah, definitely would like to see it in writing so that I can get a step ahead,
Okay.
be a step ahead. Thank you.
All right. Before I call on someone, I'd like to point out it's 5 of 9. We still have another department. We're only on day 2 of 8 days. So we have to make a decision. We can continue asking questions of this department and either A, send the other department home, or B, probably be here until 10 o'clock, okay? Or we can be very, very brief here and start up with the next department. I serve at your pleasure, but I need to know where we headed with this. I believe everybody except Larry. So we'll start, and then I'm going to work this way, all right? Kyle, 3 questions? All those in favor? All right. Councilman McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I want to focus a little bit on municipal and facility renovations under public facilities on page 3411. The $3.2 million allocated for this upcoming CIP year, and the $32.5 million for the following year. Could we get a breakdown as to how much in each year are the expected expenses regarding the City Hall redesign study and consolidation?
Councilman, I don't have an exact number. I would imagine that a space needs analysis would be, I'm just guessing here, about $250,000. What we did is, in looking around and seeing what construction cost, we budgeted $90 million over 3 years after the needs study. As I said earlier, there are a variety of ways that a structure of this nature could be built. One would be to do what many governments around the country do, is they go to real estate investment trusts. They allow them to build them, and they pay a lease payment over a period of time. And that's why I stated that $2.5 million that we pay in a lease payment right now would generate about a $75 million mortgage, which could, $75 million construction, which could very easily meet our needs without having to bond $90 million over 3 years. But what we did is we put the money in the capital budget for the municipal facility. We also have the money go down a line or two. You'll see the Bergdorf building renovations. You'll see a total of $30 million programmed in for that. Those are dollars that we wouldn't have to spend if we did this type of approach. So all we did is, looking towards future years, plugged in a number if the study says it makes sense and if the council approves it. So it's just a plug at this point.
Will that study also include a comparison of upgrading this facility compared to building a new
it will look
facility?
at this facility, but I think that the fact of the matter is everyone can't fit into this building. We're not necessarily talking about eliminating this building. We're talking about consolidating all the other city offices, maybe all the offices. But
Including the Board of Ed administration.
Right.
Which definitely would not fit in any of the buildings that we have.
So this is an attempt to try to figure out the most economical way to achieve the space needs of the city and doing it in a way that's convenient for the citizens.
Thank you. Just to kind of go back to a bigger or a 30,000-foot view here, looking at the net city CIP appropriation for the upcoming year is estimated a little over $95 million. Then for the following year, the estimation jumps up to $143 million. And the capital, the debt service on page 29-1, in this upcoming year will be about $26 million, but then that following year jumps up to almost $35 million. That's a sizable jump, and I'm concerned about it sustaining that kind of capital budget.
And I will say, Councilman, that's one of the reasons we're looking at the concept of private development, building, and leasing, because if we did that, that would take about $34 million off of next year's capital budget.
And if I can also just comment that if you'll notice on the education side for next year, we're only doing the final payment of Weaver, so the appropriation for education is small. But as you move into subsequent years, the next year it goes up to $60 million. The next year after that, we're getting close to $100 million again. So our education monies are growing again, which is the main contributor to the expenses on the capital side.
And then my final question is comparing our debt service of this current year of $36.6 million and the recommended debt service of next year of $26 million. Is that including the potential lease of the Morgan Street Garage and the paying off of those bonds?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilman Deutsch, I'm working around.
Two questions. The first one, perhaps you can get back to us in writing. Supposing because of budgetary limitations, the department was asked, looking at, let's say, pages 34, 16, et cetera, total public safety projects, total recreation and culture, total education, and finally total engineering. So supposing it was said, like for any homeowner, that you have to cut your budget in each of those areas by 10%, is that something the department could evaluate for us and suggest those projects that could well be postponed to a next fiscal year? As an example, let's say in one of them education, Belizzi air conditioning, and there's something like a 1.5 million. And one could reasonably say, well, they just have to wait another year before air conditioning is considered for that school. So would it be reasonable to ask the department to get back to us as to what projects would come under a certain line if we cut the capital improvement by 10% in each of those categories? Could that be done?
Which, I guess, I'm not sure, you said page 3417.
Well, no. In other words, the section on capital improvement fund, beginning on 3418, I'm sorry, and basically looking at those projects.
So you're saying if we looked at the existing projects that are out there where we haven't spent the money, could we cut some of them?
Yeah, if just as if you were a homeowner, and if you were a homeowner and you became unemployed, you'd postpone a kitchen renovation and so on. Could you do that if we asked you to?
We'll get back to you on that one.
Okay, and, this is a very ordinary question. If you had less money, you'd spend less, and what would you cut first? The second question, for something like Dillon Stadium, or any public interest project, there are some cities that are known to have what's called community benefits agreement, where in return for giving tax abatements, having tax fixing arrangements, there are stipulated certain contributions or other construction projects that the developer will support. So whether it's, let's say, a development at Pearl and Trumbull or at on Main Street or some other development that we're helping with tax fixing, could we reasonably ask in a written community benefits agreement that a certain portion be set aside for reconstruction of Dillon or playground or some other thing, and thereby amplify our investment or specify some side benefits?
I think, Councilman, we have done some of that in the last few tax abatement agreements that we've presented to you by getting reduction in cost of rental space for commercial property or commitments for jobs. The reason people are coming into us for assistance is because economically the deal doesn't work without us doing something. And so that if we were to add cost on top of it by having them do things in addition that work outside the pro forma, we would, in a sense, actually be paying for that additional cost by the benefit that we'd be giving them to make it happen. So all those things have to be evaluated. We do evaluate those things every time we sit down and discuss something with somebody to see what we can get out of it, because there is that cost-benefit analysis. You're getting something, we're getting something. The city should share in that benefit.
Thank you. So that's what I mean. For instance, you have Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, they all have examples of certain community benefits agreements. So I'm wondering if Hartford could just join the ranks as we develop downtown.
We will continue to look at those, yes.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Jennings, to conclude.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at the huge amounts of money the city is spending. Mr. Deller, I guess my question is to you. Today I spent more than 2 hours meeting with a couple of developers that are Hartford developers. They've done a lot in this city. They have good reputations. I have architects that have excellent reputations and experience, and they happen to be black men, but there are Latino men, there are black men, there are black women. There are many developers in this city that I know of, and contractors that probably need to be talking to you, had talked to you, and I guess they had not gotten, the out-of-town firms evidently came in and did the work. So I'm looking at or got the opportunities. I am definitely going to send them to you again and ask you to really look at some of the development they've done in this city, some of the things that they've done in this city, because one of the things that they were interested in as well, they talked about replacing Las Vegas and Keeney Park, the not undesirable situation we have in Keeney Park, with something more positive relative to cricket and an international cricket league or some kind of international cricket facility where we can bring in people to use hotels and maybe hold 3 big multi-million-dollar events a year. So I'm just asking you to please talk to these developers that I sent to you and see if there's anything that can be done with them in this city. They're living here, they're lifelong Hartford residents, and they have a lot of skills and expertise. Also, I'd like to know, you talked about the housing rehabilitation project that was pre-approved, that came from the pre-approved list, and you said 85 to 90% were Hartford contractors. If I could just get the dollar amounts on how much was spent with Hartford contractors, as well as how much was spent with Hartford contractors for other projects that you've actually identified.
We'll get you that.
All right, and I really would, I'm concerned about making sure that the local developers are not cut out for out-of-state and out-of-town developers when they actually are able to do the jobs.
Councilwoman, if they propose when we put out an RFP, they will certainly get lots of consideration. The last few RFPs that we've had for the architects, we hired local companies. We hired Hartford-based businesses. So we're doing our best to try to hire them. If they have not responded to our request for proposals, there's no way I can consider them. So they've got to file proposals.
Thank you. I think also I'm thinking in terms of maybe you sit down and talk to them as well about projects that may be beneficial to the city. Also, I'm looking at the outreach to Hartford contractors and that $310,000 project that came out with the parks planning. 3 people responded, and I heard that it was because it was on BidSync, and a lot of the contractors don't look at BidSync or don't believe that, you know, there's no, you have to almost reach out to them and let them know that these projects are in existence.
We will try to do that, but over 47 people opened and downloaded our RFP. Only 3 responded. I don't know why.
Right, but I'm telling you why. A lot of the local contractors don't use BidSync or can't. Some of them don't have that kind of computer capability, but they're great tradespeople. So, you know, and working with the Business Resource Center and with HEDCO, they can be provided the assistance that they need to get the jobs done. They're good tradespeople. So, I'm just urging that people who are not familiar with what's here, you know, maybe, you know, take a look at, you know, the contractors and the developers that are here and have been here all their lives and are still here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, what we'd like to know is if human resource is going to be short, sweet, to the point. We'll hear them now. If they're not, they better go home. Just joking.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm putting on my other hat now. Sandra Key Borges, Acting Director of Human Resources. So I have with me this evening Deborah Carabella, who's an Assistant Director of HR, Human Resources. I have Lynn LaChance, who's also an Assistant Director of Human Resources, and I have Rich Pokorski, who's our Benefits Administrator. So just very quickly, I just wanted to hit some of the highlights in the office in terms of things that are going on. The recommended budget for HR this year, or for next year, is $1.161686 million. This is about a 5.5% decrease, or $67,000 from the current year's adopted budget. The Department of Human Resources is comprised of 4 major divisions. You have the Employee Benefits, Employment Services, Labor Relations, and then Personnel Administration. As of April 1st of 2013, there were about 1,835 employees. 1,536 of them are full-time, and another 299 of them were part-time. 734 of those employees, or 40%, are Hartford residents. 1,101, or 60%, are non-Hartford residents. And of the 109 new hires, both full and part-time, 71 were Hartford residents, or 65%. And that included school crossing guards, council persons, based on a full-time population, which includes school crossing guards, council persons. The demographic at the city was 26% Hispanic, 30% Black, 42% Caucasian, and 2% other. And actually, I do have a report for your information, which I can ask one of the ladies if they can pass out, which is a demographic breakdown of the city, both in total and then also by department. Some of the accomplishments of the department. There was a complete restructuring that occurred over the past year, which was intended to streamline the way that the department interacts with the customers or the other city departments. So each of the staff was assigned different functions and also assigned support for the various city departments. We also relaunched and revised the City Academy. So now we offer mandatory courses and training to employees in customer service. We have sexual harassment training, conflict resolution, civil service hiring, just to name a few of the kinds of courses. To date, there have been about 1,593 employees, or 87% of all staff, who have attended at least one of the City Academy trainings. 1,138 employees, or 62% of all city staff, have actually attended customer service. And the mayor's goal and mandate is that all city employees at some point in time in the very near future will have received customer service training. Employee Benefits Division, and I'm going to let Rich Pokorski answer any questions that you might have regarding health insurance. But recently we had a medical RFP that resulted in savings of about $1 million in combined fixed cost. We also had CVS Caremark, which increased discount pricing structure, resulting in savings of about $6.7 million over the next 3 years for both the city and the Board of Ed. We're transitioning over 65 retiree populations into CVS Caremark for increased drug discounts, prescription compliance, and reduced out-of-pocket expenses in order to assist the retirees with what are becoming increasing drug costs. We've also expanded the availability and access to health and wellness initiatives, including piloting a Smart Shopper program, which allowed for shared cost savings and incentives for employees who choose to participate in that program. In our Employment Services Division, we've recruited a new class of firefighters, which is about 52 new firefighters. We're testing for an emergency telecommunications dispatch class. We're continuing to do recruitment for police officers. We now have a continuous recruitment program for police officers. We completed an RFP process for a new public safety testing vendor. The previous vendor's contract had expired quite some time ago, and so we're sort of backed up in some of the exams that are required. You'll recall the fire department test for the driver is one of those that we really need to get out in order to be able to reduce the overtime in that department. We've also conducted a recruitment for Maintainer 1, and we've received about 700 applications for that position, which will be tested in the coming weeks. And also we're in the process of recruiting for lifeguards. In the Employee and Labor Relations Division, we've successfully negotiated new collective bargaining agreements for police, 1716, MLA, CHPIA, and the school crossing guards in the past fiscal year, and we're currently in negotiations with HMIA. To date, there's about 22 grievances that have been filed, 8 from fire, 3 from police, 2 from CHPIA, 2 from HMIA, and 7 from 1716. And of those 22, 6 have been resolved or withdrawn. In addition, 16 old grievances were resolved, withdrawn, or upheld by the local labor board. To date, there are 8 internal EEO complaints that have been filed and 2 have been resolved. The remaining are still under investigation. And then finally, just to talk about a few strategic initiatives for the coming year. We're transitioning our life insurance carrier for additional financial savings. We're initiating an occupational health service RFP. In fact, I think that there actually is a selection process that's going on right now. We already have responses to that RFP. We're partnering with risk consultants to structure OSHA and safety classes for our employees. We're utilizing the Connecticut Health Insurance Exchange for retirees. We've begun to initiate discussions with potential aggregation of medical services through the state of Connecticut. We're working with MHIS to implement an applicant tracking in Munis, and we're continuing to improve the knowledge and skills and abilities of our employees through an expanded academy offerings. We're also in the process of revising our city pay plan for classified and unclassified employees to ensure fair, equitable, and competitive compensation. And we're going to be offering critical tests in the police captain, police lieutenant, fire captain, fire lieutenant, and the driver so that we can comply with contractual deadlines to give those tests and also to reduce overtime costs in those departments. We're all available to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Councilman Kennedy.
Thank you. Through the Majority Leader, I'm looking at your budget on 19.2. Notice last year we budgeted 15 positions. We're now at 14. I guess my question is, with the obvious loss of the head of the department, are we planning not to look for a position, or where does the position loss come from? It looks like it comes from the head of the department.
One of the positions was lost after we consolidated 2 positions into one in order to have a deputy instead. So we're planning on filling, obviously, the director. There's a deputy position, and then there's also a
A principal admin analyst, and then also a secretary.
So we're currently at 13 then? 13 employees then?
We actually have 11 right now.
We have 3 vacancies.
3 vacancies.
Are we
The
planning?
deputy, the director, and the HR analyst position, is it?
Yeah, there's a principal, there's 3
Principal,
vacancies.
principal.
There's a deputy director vacancy, there's a principal administrative analyst position, and there's also a secretary position.
Well, and then, of course, the director now.
Is it the position of the administration to fill all those positions?
We're reviewing which positions we need to fill. At this point, it is the intention to fill them, but I think that we're going to wait and see what happens with the new director before we fill any of those positions so that they could make a decision about what makes the most sense. I will say that, probably we still need to go ahead and fill the deputy. We kind of upgraded what had been a previous position to the deputy, and that position is really supposed to be responsible for the EEO. And so that really is critical. We still do need to work on our affirmative action plan and really step up our EEO. So we felt that we needed to fill that at a higher level than we had offered, because the candidates that we were getting applications from they didn't quite have the level of experience that we were looking for, so we needed to upgrade that position to a deputy.
I'm going to ask a couple of budget questions, some of which I'm going to make, you can respond in writing. And then I've got a hypothetical that I kind of want an answer to, as opposed to what the procedures when the department would be given a certain factual situation. I'd like to do it 49 of the budget detail. 820 benefits and insurance. Starting with 820001, pensioners police. Doesn't look like that was actually budgeted in the last account, so I'm assuming it's money borrowed from somewhere else. We have an actual of 6.3 million, but we're recommending 11.2 in next year's budget. What is that, and why are we almost doubling the actual number that we have to date?
This is a pension question, not related to HR, but I'll try to answer.
If it is, I'll move on to the other questions, because they may be pension as well. I've got a health benefit question. I'm looking at 820002 on page 50. Contribution to risk health, it looks like fund. We've got an interesting history there from 21 to 15 to 15 to 18 this year. Next year we're budgeting at 28.7. What's that? What is that, and why the increase?
We spoke about this last night. This is where we discussed the general fund contributes to an internal service fund.
Yep.
This is the general fund's contribution to the internal service fund. If you look at the 12-13 budget of 15.889,
yep,
this was a smaller contribution this year to the tune of about $10 million to the internal service fund. Next year, we are not reducing the general fund contribution to the internal service fund. We're trying to fund 100% of that, or close to it.
I understand that. The number is not actually 10. The previous number from the previous budget year was 21.8 from the 15.8, so you're really looking at a difference of maybe, what, 5 million? It looks like, and actual this year is 18. I mean, that is, so it's not quite, looks like from the highest number I see on this page, looks like we've got a $7 million jump in that number.
That $18 million, Councilman Kennedy, that's a year-to-date number. That'll probably grow a little bit as before the end of the year. I cannot answer what happened in 11-12 with the 21.9 million. How much of that contribution went to the internal service fund? How much the internal service fund changed up or down from the result of that? Also, we are experiencing growth in the expenditures associated with health benefits, so that'll drive it. The $15.9 million that's been budgeted for this year, that number grossed up would be more like $26.2 million. So what you're seeing when you go to 28.7, you want to try to compare that as close as possible to the grossed up number.
And I'll make these questions real quick, so I'll ask them for writing. You can respond in writing. I have questions regarding the employee medical insurance plan, the increase in the expenditure there, the workers' compensation claims, which appears to be a small expenditure, but still an increase because it looks like you're bringing it in under cost, but you're still asking for an increase. And then it looks like employer's share of the municipal, that's at 8200025227071. Those expenditures, as well as it looks like your insurance premium, looks like we've had a small increase there, and the reason why, well, and that can be in writing, that way we don't have to take a lot of time up this evening. My last question through the chair, and thank him for his indulgence, is I'm asking a personnel question, and I've been troubled throughout the course of this year with it. So I'm not a personnel lawyer, more of a personal injury defense guy. So I'll just come out and kind of ask it. In a hypothetical situation, is it ever justified for a superior, in this case, let's say a department head, to ask a deputy or an assistant for a loan or some financial assistance under any circumstances?
You're asking me my personal opinion, or
Oh,
you're
I'm
asking my
asking
professional? Because
professional
my professional,
opinion. Professional opinion.
I really don't feel comfortable answering that question on a professional level, considering that I know factually what it relates to, and I would be concerned about having that kind of a conversation on the public record.
Well, let's put it this way. My concern is in terms of the department and how the department handled that situation, and what were the results, and how did it move forward, okay, and how that was addressed.
I can tell you that I do know that the director of HR did, in fact, investigate that as part of an overall complaint that was filed with her.
No, I understood that. My question probably goes toward policy, how an organization handles that situation. Where I sit as an attorney in my organization, that could not occur. And so I'm trying to figure out, how is it possible that something that, where I, just from a legal point, but I'm not a personnel guy, that seems to be in a real bad situation, and how do we handle that regardless of the people who are involved? Because there has to be guidelines and procedures and standards to address every issue regardless of who, which is why I answered in a hypothetical. Because I don't want to get into details either, but again, my concern is the procedures or lack thereof when something that is clearly an issue not being handled in a situation that appropriate from a personnel standpoint, in my judgment.
And I'm not a personnel lawyer either, so I can tell you that I do know that the matter was reviewed by the HR director. I believe it was discussed with the department head. I don't know the nature of the conversations. I don't know how things were resolved with regard to any direction or directives that were given.
It's 9:25.
I I understand. I'm
And
gonna,
we should be addressing the budget because we also have other individuals who'd like to ask some questions.
I'm still gonna ask the next question. Take out the folks involved. I'm looking for the standard, and maybe someone can address it in writing, but that's a concern.
Okay.
Okay, about, I don't think there was a standard done. I don't think it was actually handled the right way, and I'm just trying to figure out where does personnel go and how does it act going forward? Okay?
And just to comment that, I don't know if we're going to be able to answer your question about how it was handled, because the person that handled it is not here any longer, but certainly we can talk about what the standard should be and moving forward, what the policy should be to deal with those kinds of situations.
Thank you. Councilman Anderson.
I can't hear. Yeah.
I am so sorry.
Okay.
My question relates to evaluations and personnel development. Can you speak to that for me from an HR standpoint?
As far as, I'm not sure what you want me to focus, as far as training goes, or?
Well, not only training. One of the things that I found out that was very disheartening to me was that there wasn't a standardized, some sort of employee evaluation program put together for the entire city. Some departments did it, some departments do not do it. I'm wondering if there's going to be, moving forward, a overall city plan for looking at doing evaluations, and evaluations may be on the good side or bad side. If I'm an employee looking to advance my career within city service, how do I assess myself? How can my immediate supervisor assess me, let me know where I may need to bone up on some of my lacking attributes?
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Yes, there was a plan, there was a development plan or a evaluation put together, but it was put together primarily for non-union and unclassified employees. That, I believe, is what you may be referring to. Some of the bargaining units do, and we have negotiated with them to have separate and distinct, because they require that for their particular bargaining units, like HMIA has their own specific evaluation form that they require their members to use. And some of the other bargaining units also have their own specific. Some do not have any. We would like to have a standardized and hope to negotiate more of a standardized form that we can use across the city. Unfortunately, we do not have that available at the time. And each bargaining unit requires evaluations at different times as well. So, but primarily for non-union and unclassified, we do try to do it on a yearly annual basis, usually in July.
Okay. There was a couple open-ended questions. Number one is, you said you try to do it. Is it being done? Two, I understand there's some labor negotiations that have to take place with the unions. Understandable. There's contracts in place. I'm a union guy myself. So are we moving forward to that system, or do you think that's something that we're not going to even pursue? And if so, how do we look at, next time negotiations come up, how do we implement this type of system in place so therefore the employees can be evaluated on a fair level?
Right now, obviously, we've gone through negotiations with quite a few of the bargaining units, so we obviously, in order to negotiate that with them, we'd have to wait until the contracts are open again. However, we are in discussions with HMIA at the moment, and that may be something that we can talk with them about, although they do have their own evaluation program that is being used. And is it enforced is at the discretion, and shouldn't be at the discretion. It's actually mandatory by the contract, but should be done by their supervisor for their employees. And we do try to remind the departments that it needs to be done, and they're getting a lot better at it than they ever used to be, I will say that. But we could be better at monitoring it and enforcing it. I do agree with that.
And let me just respond that some departments do a better job than others. There's no question about that. And so, we're sort of laying down the hammer that we're expecting all of them to eventually get to it. The evaluation tools, depending on which union you're in, some are not as good as others. But having said that, we still need to at least have something in place so that we can at least whatever the tool is, evaluate them based on whatever we can. So I completely agree with you that we have to continue to move in that direction and make sure that everybody gets evaluated based on their performance.
And I also just wanted to add that in negotiations with Chapia, MLA, and Local 1716, we did discuss and put on the table formal performance evaluations. We were not successful in getting it in the contracts per se. However, MLA does do evaluations every year, so they just didn't want it in their contract, but they do them every year. Also, with Chapia, they, again, didn't want it in the contract, but we had some open dialogue, and they admitted that we have the right to evaluate our employees. And so when managers come to HR, we always tell them that they should evaluate their employees. Maybe it can't be as formal as Hamia's because it's in their contract, but as managers, they should be providing positive and constructive criticism for their employees so that they can grow and move, upward in the department. Also, when people have come in to me and Lynn and asked for some advice, we've told them to go to either the people that they interviewed with or to go with their department heads and ask them what could they do to possibly make themselves, not better per se, but steps they could take to elevate themselves within the city. And so we've encouraged them to do that as well.
Okay.
Councilman McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to bring your attention to the department scorecard on page 19-5. I'm curious as to why, for every year listed in this chart, that the number of positions filled exceeds, in some cases by quite a large number, the number of positions posted.
Yeah, sure. When we post for a position, oftentimes, well, not often, but quite frequently, the posting is for numerous vacancies. For example, in December, we had one posting for actually we didn't have a posting, but at one point we had a posting and we made an eligible register list. That was only one posting, but out of that posting, we hired 52 employees. The same thing with our police recruitments, which we probably post anywhere from 3 to 4 per year, but when we hire off of that, we hire multiple classes, 25, 30 people. So the same happens when we have administrative assistants, emergency telecommunications, dispatchers, lifeguards. There's one posting, but there's numerous vacancies.
And so do the postings detail the number of vacancies that are sought to be filled?
No, they do not.
No. Sometimes if it's just one vacancy, they'll use vacancy, and if there's more than one vacancy, we'll use the plural, but it doesn't say how many. And one of the reasons why we do not do that is because sometimes those numbers change. One minute we might be thinking we have 50, and due to budget, it goes down or it goes up, and so we just kind of stick to the singular or plural.
But then is this all vetted through the current process that's been described to council regarding the filling of positions?
Yes.
Position review committee, yeah.
And one final question regarding benefits administration. What role does your department play regarding trying to identify new ways of organizing our benefits programs that might allow us to save money, since benefits are so expensive in this budget?
Well, for the most part, I think when we look at the budget and we go back a few fiscal years, we're actually in a narrow band of what our net costs are. They've been anywhere from 28 to about $34 million year over year. So I think for the most part, where healthcare trend is increasing, we're doing a fairly good job is keeping our costs down. Having said that, in regards to a collectively bargain environment, anything that we do that requires changes to either have an employee have more skin in the game requires negotiations. So, that's a process. We can't arbitrarily make decisions to change the plan design, make it less rich, more cost effective for the city. So that's a big hurdle that every municipality has to overcome.
Sure. It's getting late. All right, so I just got a quick few questions. Concerning, well, it's very concerning, right? Because currently we don't have no department head in this division. Who is running the day-to-day stuff in this division?
It really depends on what it is. They are all reporting to me. I do have weekly staff meetings with them. If there's any decisions that need to be made, they're coming to me, and I'm signing off on everything. But in terms of being down in the office, the three individuals that are here this evening are the people that are actually in the office dealing with the day-to-day things as they come up. And if there are things that require my action and my input, then they're certainly bringing those things to my attention, as are other members of the staff as well. You know, I've invited whoever has a concern to come to me directly and let me know what's going on. So I'm kind of up and down the stairs.
Okay. There is no one in the office that can take up that position, the day-to-day. My concerns is, Senior Key Borges, is it's concerning for a council member to understand that you're the corporation counsel, you're the CEO, the acting CEO, and acting personnel director, human services. It concerns me that it's impossible for someone to really be on top of everything, especially three different departments that you know don't function. Is there a remedy moving forward? Because according to the charter, I guess the mayor in section Q in his powers, it says assign an employee of one department to a temporary performance of duties in another department, subject to provisions of the applicable collective bargaining agreements, and whether the interest of the city is required. No such temporary assignment shall last past the beginning of the next fiscal year. It does imply one employee. It doesn't, and it says to temporarily perform the duties. You're currently performing the duties of two. I don't know if I mean, I guess this is the right of the mayor, but I am very concerned that the day-to-day work in this department are going to lack. And this is a department that we can't have that. I would like to see, you know, that we move quickly to fill in this vacancy, because this is a very important department. It's a $1.2 million operation. So I just, you know, that's my concern. So I just hope that there is some quicker remedy than just having Sandy do all the departments. So.
Amen.
Thank you. All right. That's a good thing.
But let me just say that we are working on some backup plans to be able to do something on an interim basis until we can get a permanent director. And let me also just say that once again, that even though we don't have a permanent director and I can't be there all the time as you described, that the office is functioning, that people are doing their work, that things are getting done. So it's not as if no one is doing anything. People are, in fact, still doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and I'm making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and the people sitting at the table are making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So the work is getting done. But I hear you loud and clear. I completely agree with you, and we're going to try and execute on what the mayor's ideas are as soon as we possibly can.
And my last question is concerning the contract consulting services. The detailed budget is 82002, item 534070. I keep seeing this, contract consulting services. When you combine them citywide, we're about $847,000. The good side on this is that you guys are decreasing. The pattern that I would love to see. In some areas you see increases. Tell me a little bit more of what this service provide. Can we do this in-house? Why are we contracting out? And
I can tell you just some general ones that I know of. For example, I mentioned to you in my introduction this evening that we just hired a test consultant to go out and do testing for promotional exams for police and fire. Their fees are tens of thousands of dollars for that. So that's just one example. There's an initiative in the police department budget to begin to have them look at, have a consultant come in and look at deployment. I think there's as much as $60,000 or $70,000 that is being proposed to do that kind of work. So those are just some very loose examples of some of the contract consulting services that are out there in the budget. Unfortunately, I can't. I don't know if you can think of any other ones at the moment, but we can certainly provide you with a list of what those services are.
And Councilman DeJesus, the one that you're referring to here, the $250,000 budget for contract consulting, that is our medical consulting firm. Used to be Aon, now it's Siegel. So those are, Rich, why don't you speak to what they do?
Well, the primary function for them is actually do the underwriting and the actuarial analysis for the city for the health and benefits plan. So that is something that every municipality has. If you try to have somebody on staff, an actuary will probably run you well over $100,000 in salary, plus the fringe benefit portion was probably $35,000. So just that alone, that one individual costs you, north of $100,000. So those are definitely necessary positions that are required. And if you didn't have a position or a consultant to do that, I think everybody would question how rates are developed, and it would be very problematic to explain how I charge people what they charge based upon what my costs are medically.
when did they come in? When did they start working with us?
There's always been a consultant on staff, always, as far as a contract. We're just receiving a new consultant this time around, moving forward for the next fiscal year.
Now we're talking about that. What are the returns on savings for the health clinic right below us in the first floor?
We're actually right now in concluding the first year that they've been operational. As you know, the build-out was actually borne by St. Francis Healthcare Partners at a cost of about $250,000. I am just getting word that they're probably just breaking even right now. But knowing that where my emergency room expenses lie, it's a big chunk out of my dollars for my healthcare costs. And on average, a third of emergency room visits are non-urgent situations during work hours. So the more people I actually drive through that clinic, knowing that my clinic costs probably run me less than $100 a visit, whereas an ER is going to cost me around $1,100 or $1,200.
Understood, but did we get any? Do we have any revenues already that we projected?
I've asked, and I'm waiting for something.
Okay. Yeah, whenever that comes to you, yeah, that'll be.
Oh, absolutely, and I'm hoping some ER utilization is decreasing somewhat, so we will see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Deutsch.
Thank you. Some of that dialogue was a little hard to hear. Is it reasonable to request in writing some of the features of the health consulting roles that have been performed?
I have a scope of services that they perform, and I can provide that to you or the council as a whole if you so request.
Yeah. Some of that we might have seen. You said we shifted from Aon to another firm. Do they include in their function auditing, or could you continue and then Why don't we, this is such an
Okay.
emotional subject. Why don't we
I'm sorry. Okay. I think one of my concerns is that we had 8 EEO complaints filed. Were those 8 from across the from throughout all the employees in the in the city?
Yes. All departments.
Okay, in all departments. And who in personnel is currently in charge of EEO complaints?
No one person is in charge. What we do, since we're broken out by departments, what we've been doing is, for the departments that I support, for the employees that work in those respective departments, if they file an internal EEO complaint, then I would handle it. Otherwise, if it's a department that Deb would support, then it's something that she would handle.
All right, and I'm guessing when you have civil rights complaints that come to your department, how are they investigated? Who conducts the investigations?
Deb or I, right now, are conducting the investigations.
Okay, and when you conduct the investigations, are the managers investigated for the charges that are brought up against them?
Anyone who is cited in the investigation, in the complaint, is someone that we would talk to, plus any witnesses that may also be cited. But we initially meet with the person who is actually filing the complaint to make sure that we understand what it is that they're putting down as their alleged complaint and getting more detailed information. And we start with that process and work from there.
And are managers ever, I'm concerned about the liability to the city because civil rights complaints are, well, as you know, they can be costly. Sure. So are when people are charging managers with civil rights complaints, are managers ever disciplined?
I haven't gotten to that point with some of mine yet because we're still under investigations. I don't know historically if that's been the case. Strictly related to internal EEO complaint, I don't have that knowledge. I don't know if Deb has.
No, I don't. Before Lynn and I started taking over, and Val, because she helped us too this year, it was handled by Santiago Malave for a short period of time, and then before that by the Department of Human Relations. So we do not have that specific information for you at this time. Unfortunately, like Lynn said, we're still investigating ours, and right now there's only been 2 that were, one was withdrawn and the other one was closed, and so there was no discipline in those 2.
All right, so you've only done 2.
Correct.
Okay, so you have 6 more to do, or these are 8 new ones?
6 more to do.
Okay, all right. And, well, I guess my concern is when Human Relations closed, it was my understanding that your department took over the investigation of civil rights complaints, as well as the training and other things that go along with that. Are any managers trained in how to avoid a civil rights complaint or how to address them? Or, is there training being done across the board on sexual harassment, employment discrimination, and when charges come out, well, when charges are made, it's my understanding from you two that the managers are investigated first, or they're not investigated once somebody brings a charge?
They are spoken to as part of the investigative process. Whoever is incited, whoever the complaint is against, we do also speak to them because you have to get a fair perspective on what the issues are and hear both sides of the story. In addition to any witnesses to either the incident or the event, or that may have experienced similar situations.
And let me just say that it's not always managers,
Right.
but I can think of one instance where a manager was in fact disciplined based on a complaint, and that manager wound up losing his job.
Yeah. It can often be against, coworker to coworker, often. So.
But also, just as I mentioned earlier, we actually do offer sexual harassment training.
Right.
We have someone in Corporation Counsel who offers that training. and we offer conflict resolution, and we don't offer civil rights per se, but we do have different kinds of training programs, and certainly maybe that's one we need to think about, you know, whether we can offer that kind of training as well. But let me also just say that before HR took over the function of investigating, it actually was in Corp Counsel for a short time. There was a gentleman who came from Human Relations named Gil, who actually was in my office for a short time, who was doing the investigations when he was in Human Relations. When he came upstairs to Corporation Counsel, he continued to do those investigations. We had some concerns about the fact that we were investigating and also the attorneys, and so we shifted him down to a different office, and then unfortunately he retired, and so then we had to move the function again, and that's when it got moved to HR.
And thank you. And can you tell me, the position for the Director of Human Resources is open now, correct?
It's not posted as of yet, but it will be open soon, yes.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Deutsch, you're going to wrap this up, correct?
Okay, let's try again. Since we have already said many times that a major portion of our city council budget is going not only to debt service but also to pensions and benefits. And I see what we have is 3 positions, am I right, in HR that oversee benefits administrations, 3 hardworking full-time employees who I'm sure work more than full-time. We went through a process a little over a year ago, I guess, of putting out an RFP for medical and dental services. And apparently that wound up saving the city some money, $200,000, I think, with a new Anthem contract. I may be wrong. But in general, do we have enough staffing within those 3 positions or in the department to monitor very closely the performance of our major contract, namely Anthem, WellPoint, I guess it is, in terms of its medical loss ratio? That means its administrative fraction as opposed to paying out actual benefits. Do we feel that within the department as well as within our consultant, that all of us, including city council, are aware, in a sense, of the, let's say, the bang we get for our buck by contracting with Anthem as opposed to, some other third party, so that we can decide when, let's say, to issue a new RFP. As a matter of fact, one question specifically is what year does the current Anthem contract end? I've forgotten that. I should know. And what is our procedure for asking what sort of efficiency our major contractor has, in fact, what kind of profits they're making, which to some extent, of course, is at the expense of the city. So can we, periodically, let's say even quarterly or semi-annually, have the kind of data that lets us judge the performance of this major contractor for our major expense?
Well, I think there's a couple of portions that I can answer that question. There's the side of the business where you actually have to pay for the administration, and that's the network access fees, the cost to file the claims, the reinsurance portion. All of those, yeah, we did save over $1 million on the last RFP, and those were guaranteed hard dollar savings. The other side of that is the actual discounts that Anthem negotiates with providers, doctors, networks, hospitals, etc. The question is, do they have the best discounts as compared to other carriers? So when you say, well, what is the performance? Well, as we go through these RFPs, we make an analysis of who actually provides the best discounts for the lowest cost for us to save money. So that's one portion of it. The other portion is we did institute performance metrics with the new contracts with Anthem that actually had money on the table. If there was particular places where they're actually falling behind on things, that we have money in place that they would pay us that if they do fall behind some kind of a metric. So we put that into place. And we put into place, some additional, they provided us with $75 million in wellness programs we haven't taken advantage of, and some $10,000 in technology. So we did negotiate something with Anthem in regards to hard dollar savings. The question is the utilization patterns of our employees and our retirees. I cannot tell you through my crystal ball how my utilization is going to occur, but what I want to do is reduce the demand for the health care, increase consumerism in health care, and possibly look at aggregation of health care, because as this council knows, we actually piggybacked on the state of Connecticut's prescription drug program, which we've carved away from Anthem because we said we would get bigger discounts at another carrier. And we have, and we've saved $1.8 million the first year, and over the next 3 fiscal years between the Board of Ed and the city, we're going to save another $6.7 million. From my calculation, that's about $750,000 to the city alone. So that aggregation was an administrative decision, and it was a win-win for the city. So we did that on the prescription drug side. We should also investigate it on the medical side, because really the medical side is really where our costs are being driven up, not the prescription, not the dental. So when you say, are we getting the best bang for the buck, the market's moving away from volume-based pricing and pay for services, that is the old method. Now we're moving to a cradle-to-grave mentality about collaboration, coordination between primary care as the quarterback, and something called the patient-centered medical home, where we pay a little bit more to the primary care physician, but he has to provide some type of a metric that he's actually providing quality of care for every dollar spent rather than the volume of care. And that's where the market's going, and that's where we're focusing on in the Benefits Administration Department to see what can we do to participate in these patient-centered medical homes, aggregation of services, pooling, because really those are the only ways to really gain efficiency in the healthcare market.
Is there a figure that you can give us for Anthem's medical loss ratio, or in other words, the fraction that they spend on actual medical care differentiated from their administration? Is it like typically 85%, 90%?
It's around 5% as far as administration, and 95% claims. Okay.
Through Anthem?
Correct. There's a breakdown per cost per month per contract that includes aggregate stop loss, individual stop loss, network access fees, administration, and there's also PPACA fees that we've had to build into the cost, which is the Patient Protection and Affordability Care Act provision with Obamacare, which causes us to actually increase our costs on the administrative side too, based upon free oral contraceptives or contraceptives for females. Other particular programs that we have to pay for. Even the state of Connecticut had passed a law that said that we're going to be assessed fees for childhood immunizations with kids who can't afford immunizations. We are being assessed for that. And last fiscal year, I was charged $20,000 for that. So those are all the additional fees that we're going to be paying in conjunction with the administrative costs that Anthem has built into the cost of the plan.
Okay, so just to clarify that, so you're saying, I'm a little incredulous, unless I'm misunderstanding, that an organization like Anthem is actually spending 95% on patient services rather than the more common 80, 85, 90% with the rest administrative expense. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the majority of everything is not what Anthem is paying. I'm paying. We're paying. We pay through our zero balance account. We're self-insured. We pay the claims $1. The additional costs are the monthly payments I have to pay Anthem for those things like the reinsurance. If I pay up to $300,000 initially in a calendar year for a service, and if somebody has a NICU, a child who is in intensive care for a period of time that costs me $1 million, I pay up to the $300,000. Anthem would pick up the $700,000. So I pay $900,000 for that reinsurance. Or if there's a pandemic and my claims are expected to be $80 million this year, and at 150% of that 80, Anthem picks up everything else. Those are all costs that are borne into the plan. So those are just, items that we have to build into the plan to safeguard and protect the liability to the city.
Thank you.
Yes, we've been here 6 hours. Larry stopped just before 10 o'clock, so thank you everyone for being here. I've been ordered to gavel this to an end.
Never enough time. Never enough